And House Republican leaders are going to have to explain that to their own base, which also does not want to see another dangerous, potentially disastrous Middle Eastern war.
Salute to everybody in the building, man. Iran just got at us, y'all. They have attacked a U.S. base in Qatari, guys. This is an official press conference. They talking about is it even necessary?
Sought congressional approval here. Would you have given it to him?
We've seen no evidence to date that an offensive strike of this nature was justified under the War Powers Act or the Constitution. But the whole reason for the Trump administration to undertake that process is to come up to Capitol Hill and convince the American people and their elected representatives in
this
the House.
Is a live press conference, guys.
And what I can say is not a scintilla of evidence to date has been presented that I have seen to justify the notion that there was an imminent threat to the United States of America. If the administration has evidence to the contrary, come up to present it. We're not hard to find. I'm not hiding. And we've asked for a Gang of Eight briefing. Tomorrow, there will be an opportunity for every single member of the House to hear the information from the administration, and hopefully they will present it in a manner that's comprehensive. It will be probed, it will be tested, it will be aggressively pushed back against, and then we'll see what the outcome is after that classified.
Just up until this point, what is your estimation of how close Iran has been to obtaining a nuclear weapon?
That's a question that the administration is going to have to provide to us and to the American people.
Mr. Leader.
Okay. Go back.
Yeah, Leader Jeffries, you clearly think President Trump's actions here were unconstitutional.
What's up, Josh?
So what are you and other
Iran just attacked Qatari, U.S. base in Qatari, my guy. Yeah, man, it's done got real, man. They done retaliated. Continue to double tap that screen. This is a live press conference. Man, this is crazy.
The Trump administration will have an ability to try to convince members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that it was a justified action, and ultimately convince the American people. And that will begin tomorrow, and we'll see what happens from there. There's no evidence that I have seen to justify the military strike that took place in the
all right, so I'm gonna pause this. Let's get to where the actual they telling y'all what I'm telling y'all is true. I'm gonna pause this one. It's live, but I'm finna let y'all see where they saying that it's true. You know that they basically just got at us, guys. Hold on, that one ain't it. This one is.
Let's now switch to Israel. Go to our chief foreign correspondent, Trey Yanks. He's live in Tel Aviv with the latest, not only from Israel, but what do you make of the fact that this appeared to be a pretty limited response, Trey?
Yeah, John, good afternoon. We're getting more information from regional sources right now on this Iranian attack targeting the Al Udeid airbase just outside of Doha, Qatar. The latest information that we have, according to the Qatari Foreign Ministry, they say these missiles were intercepted over the Qatari capital of Doha. They say there are no injuries on the ground, and the Qataris are condemning this attack launched by Iran. This is significant, but not unexpected. The distance between Qatar and Iran is just over 100 nautical miles, and this is a large base, the largest American base in the region, and it had largely been evacuated, according to one source that we spoke with before this attack took place. The Americans understood that Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain could be on the top target list for the Iranians in any sort of response following those strikes that were ordered by President Trump to go after Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. We're working to get some confirmation about reports that American bases in Iraq may have been targeted. But again, the information that we have about the Gulf is significant. There are air defense systems in Qatar, both the THAAD missile defense system and the Patriot system. And according to some initial video that we reviewed from sources in Doha, it looks like, if not all, but the majority of these incoming missiles were shot down overhead. In terms of what led up to this, we know earlier today the U.S. Embassy in Doha sent out an alert to American citizens in Qatar to shelter in place. Shortly after that, the airspace over this country was closed. You could see on flight radar maps a number of flights diverting to other regional airports. And again, that condemnation coming in from the Qataris. We're also monitoring Iranian state media at this hour, who says that they launched this attack, calling it the Annunciation of Victory. Iranian state media also saying their military says this was a devastating and powerful attack. This is not unexpected propaganda to receive from the regime in Tehran, but again, an indication that the Iranians are looking to save face following this U.S. strike that went after their nuclear facilities over the weekend. Other regional countries, including Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE, do remain on high alert at this hour, over concern that there could be further attacks on U.S. interests in the region. Of course, the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. There are also thousands of American forces in Kuwait. And then the possibility that Iraq could be targeted as well. I can take you back to 2020 when the Americans ordered that drone strike against Qasem Soleimani outside of Baghdad's international airport. The Iranians responded then with 13 ballistic missiles against the Ain al-Assad air base in western Iraq. And so, of course, missile defense systems across the region remain on high alert. Again, the Americans knew this was a possibility and largely evacuated much of their personnel from these areas. John, Sandra?
All right, just going through the Qatar response here. Qatar saying it reserves the right to respond after this Iranian attack. As John just reported, Qatar is saying no casualties from that attack at the U.S. military base. Thank goodness. And the top security body there, Iran's top security body there, is saying armed forces used the same number of bombs that the U.S. had used in attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. That is per the latest statement that we've been digesting, Trey. Please do weigh in on that. As John and I were just discussing, is what we're seeing, is this evidence of diminished capabilities on the part of Iran?
Thank God it didn't happen on U.S. soil.
The missiles that the Iranians are likely using against American interests in Qatar, as Jennifer noted, are some from their shorter range arsenal. Cruise missiles or possibly medium range ballistic missiles, but not the same missiles that they were using over the past 11 days to target major Israeli population centers. A Qatari source just sending me another statement that I do want to just read here live. From a spokesman for Qatar's foreign minister saying, "We reaffirm that dialogue is the only way to overcome the current crisis and ensure the security in the region and the peace of its people remains." And so the Qataris still, amid all of this, encouraging diplomacy and dialogue in the region. They have been one of the leaders in the Middle East over the past more than 600 days, trying to de-escalate regional tension, bring all parties to the table, and ultimately find some sort of off-ramp. Ceasefire agreements, or at least temporary understandings. But as this war develops between Israel and Iran, there is concern that this could spiral and continue, because we heard from President Trump directly, we heard from the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth that any attack on American interests in the region would be met with a response. Everyone from American officials to current and former Israeli officials warned Iran against such an attack taking place. Now, while this is limited in nature, it certainly does bring this entire conflict into a new chapter and raises questions about how the Americans might respond to this direct attack on their largest military base in the Middle East. This is a base that normally houses around 10,000 U.S. personnel. We have reported from the Al-Udaid base just outside of Doha. It's about a 30-minute drive from the U.S. Embassy in the Qatari capital, and it's a place where there's a lot of coordination for U.S. Central Command. You might remember back in 2021 when those evacuation flights were taking place. Many of them were landing from Kabul, Afghanistan to Doha, Qatar at this airbase. And so it's a base that was built in the late 90s. It cost around $1 billion to build, and it is still owned by the Qataris, but it is, again, the largest American base in the region, and there is close coordination for U.S. Central Command done out of this base. It was largely evacuated before this took place, and again, according to a spokesman for Qatar's foreign ministry, no one was injured in this missile strike launched by Iran. But again, this shows that the Iranians are willing to respond directly to American interests in the region. And even before the war between Israel and Iran erupted 11 days ago with this Israeli strike starting against the top IRGC officials, Iranian nuclear scientists, and of course Iran's nuclear program, The United States was preparing for this possibility.
Russia and China
remember about 2 weeks ago, President Trump ordered a partial evacuation of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. There was a voluntary evacuation for the dependents of U.S. Embassy personnel and military spouses and children in places like Bahrain and Kuwait. The United States understood that as a war would develop between Israel and Iran, that U.S. interests in the region could come under attack. And of course, with those U.S. strikes against the Iranian nuclear facilities, those 3 facilities over the weekend, the officials here have been bracing for such a response. Israeli officials, though, remain on high alert, understanding that this is certainly not the end of Iranian response as it relates to Israel. But as for American forces in the region, again, the latest information that we can report attributable to Qatari officials is that there were no injuries in these strikes that took place just earlier this hour. And there is initial reporting coming in right now from the New York Times indicating that Iran coordinated the attacks with the American airbase in Qatar, and Qatari officials gave advance notice that the attacks were coming to minimize the casualties. Again, that information attributable to the New York Times, but this is not surprising because they did a very similar coordination back in 2020 in response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that drone strike that President Trump ordered. This was meant to contain possible escalation in the region. And so we'll work on matching that reporting from the New York Times, but it would not be surprising that the Iranians wanted to coordinate their response as to not drag more.
Did y'all hear him bring up Soleimani? I told y'all, you know what I'm saying? I asked y'all yesterday, could this be a personal thing between Iran and the U.S. based on what Trump did in his first term by going at them by unaliving their military leader Soleimani? Now you hear the news talking about Soleimani too. They vow revenge about that. And yes, they just struck a U.S. base in Qatar. You know, it's crazy, y'all.
Officials and militaries in the region into the current war that is escalating between Israel and Iran. Guys?
You know, as you're on the air, Trey, you probably can't see it. We're getting some pretty spectacular footage of the missile intercepts there. We don't know if it was all just American Patriot missiles or if there were other anti-missile devices that were set up into the sky as well, but it's looking very much like Israel did over the last couple of weeks. Apparently, the Iranians have given this a name, Operation Fatah's Blessing, against the American
Oh my goodness, Fatah's Blessing is the name
this question
of
to you.
So
we saw the response at the Al-Assad Air Base, and somewhere up to 17 missiles fell on the Al-Assad Air Base. The fact that this was very limited, Iran says we matched the number of missiles to the number of bombs that were dropped on Iran. We had a number of 6 given to us by the Israelis, which would be far below the number of bombs that were dropped on Iran. I mean, does this suggest that this is merely a symbolic response so that the Iranian regime can say we punched America in the nose, whereas really, I mean, they didn't even ruffle a hair on our forehead?
Let's go. They say
absolutely.
They ain't
and
nothing.
They do this often to try and contain possible escalation in the region. We were on the ground in Baghdad, Iraq, when that other ballistic missile attack took place back in 2020. And there was an understanding that American interests could be moved. There was a warning to U.S. troops to prepare to get into shelters. There were a lot of minor injuries for forces then from the blast of those missiles back in 2020. But this coordination does take place to try and contain escalation. And in terms of Iran's capabilities across the region, it's important to remember that Iran still, despite the fact that Israel and the United States have gone after Iranian interests within their own country, and the Israelis have gone after these ballistic missile launching positions and other IRGC capabilities, weapons storage facilities, for example, the Iranians still have the ability to operate from other countries. They can, through their proxies, these Iran-backed Iraqi and Syrian Shia militias, launch limited attacks with missiles and rockets toward American interests in the region. And there are no reports indicating that that has taken place. And so Iran still has the ability to ratchet up the pressure against American interest in the Middle East. But it appears here they are trying to coordinate some possible response as to not drag the United States more directly into the fight. There's an understanding that the Americans have a capacity and they have weapons that the Israelis do not have, and a willingness, if American forces or interests interests in the region come under attack to get more directly involved in the fight. And the regime in Tehran has been extremely weakened following the 11-day campaign that the Israelis have launched not only against their nuclear facilities, but also against top IRGC officials. Remember, in that opening wave, the Israelis took out nearly the entire chain of command for the IRGC Air Force commanders in the Iranian capital of Tehran. We've spoken with top Israeli intelligence officials who have described to Fox News how they are systematically hunting down Iranian officials. And this gives you a sense of how their military chain of command has been decimated over the past week and a half. And so they're still able to coordinate this response. There is an understanding that this is a very large country, more than 90 million people in Iran. And so, of course, they knew that if there was going to be a regional war, it would come in waves.
Iran
and so they
has
have capabilities.
retaliated,
They
guys.
still can target U.S. interests
They
in the
have
region.
retaliated.
But again, it appears today that they've tried to limit this with just targeting initially this U.S. base just outside of Doha, Qatar. And according to reports, coordinate their response as to not drag the United States into the war more directly.
Military base.
All right,
Ecuador.
Trey, also just want to get this in here. Bahrain now says it has shut down airspace temporarily amid fears of retaliation by Iran against these U.S. attacks. Also, Rich Edson reporting for us has just informed us that President Trump is not yet in that situation, the situation room for that security meeting. So we do anticipate that is still happening, but we haven't gotten yet word that he has entered that meeting. Trey, we'll get back to you very shortly.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily.
Hold up, there's more, guys. Hold on, there's more. Hold up, let's get to it, man. Continue to double tap that screen, get those likes all the way up. There is most definitely more on this situation, man. It's crazy. Iran has retaliated
warnings
against
from
the
Iran
U.S.
that they would indeed retaliate to the U.S. strikes on 3 nuclear facilities. The latest one came from the Iranian president probably only about 40 or 45 minutes ago. He's not a key decision maker. The Ayatollah is in normal circumstances, but these are abnormal circumstances. But again, warning that there would be retaliation. Remember, President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth have made it very clear that if there is any kind of retaliation from Iran, that would lead to an even greater response
and they
from the
responded,
United
guys.
States. But there is precedent here. Remember the former head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, General Soleimani. He was assassinated back in 2020.
There goes Soleimani name again.
President Trump's first term in office. I was in northern Iraq when Iran responded. They fired at U.S. bases near where we were in Erbil in the north of the country. They fired at U.S. bases elsewhere in the country and on the border near Syria as well. So they have form, if you like. Now, that was a calibrated response. It was one for Iran to say, look, we did respond, but no further. It allowed for
salute to everybody
de-escalation.
out there, man. Continue
I'm
to
not
double
sure
tap
we're in
that
the
screen,
same
get the
territory
likes
right
up.
now, especially
Iran
given the very
has
specific
retaliated
threat
against
that
America
President
by
Trump
striking
has made
a U.S.
against any of what was happening
base
in the
in
eventuality
Ecuador.
of any retaliation. But the facts are, there was this threat. There was airspace was closed.
What's up, Skip?
And the Israelis also monitoring the situation. There are reports. We have a colleague whose sister lives in Doha. Reports of hearing explosions. But we're in this very foggy situation at the moment. We just need to take a breath and look at what possibly could have happened and wait until we get facts issued from the Pentagon and from the White House and potentially from Qatari officials.
This is
just
crazy,
one other
guys.
thing worth adding. Of course, you know, these bases have sophisticated air defense of their own, but Qatar also has sophisticated air defense. It has the US Patriot and THAAD missile systems, some of which are being used here in Israel as Iran attacks. So it's possible when people say they've heard explosions that these are intercepts. So at the moment, I think we just need to take our time.
Qatar, there you go.
Time,
Qatar,
and wait and see exactly what's happened.
And Ian, it does sound like the Iranians are now calling this operation Annunciation of Victory. I want to bring in our senior political correspondent, Rachel
Shout out to
Scott,
AJ
for a little bit
recapping
more
that
on
membership.
the reaction here. We're also seeing some video from inside Doha. Rachel, what are you watching for in terms of reaction from the U.S., particularly with what we've heard from the
Breaking
president?
news, guys. Breaking news.
Well, Diane, I just left the West Wing. I spoke to a senior administration official who told me that the White House, the Department of Defense, they are aware of and they are closely monitoring any potential threats to U.S. troops, even including Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. We know that's an air base that the president did visit back in May on his first foreign trip to the Middle East. It comes, as Ian was saying, amid these warnings from President Trump himself, but also key members of his administration about any potential retaliation. The president saying directly if future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier. The president saying any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with far greater than what was witnessed on that initial
now they say any attack, which means right this now, the president, which means must we respond now, guys? Must the U.S. respond?
We have watched members of his national security team, including the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, make their way into the West Wing as we anticipate more from the White House and this administration on their reaction and next possible steps, as the president has warned.
And I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, you were actually at this very base just over a month ago when President Trump went to visit. This is a critical base for several U.S. operations in the past and expected to be
breaking news, guys.
What
breaking
do you make
news.
Of this? Iran now announcing that they're attacking it.
And it is the largest U.S. airbase in the region, obviously positioned critically. And the president was there just a few weeks ago on May 15th. I was there. This was during his
shout out to AJ for being a member for the last 6 months.
In the Middle East as well. And at the time, it was interesting, the president speaking
put
to
back on your work shirt. All hands on deck.
And at the time, he said that it was his priority to end conflicts, not start them. But he added in those remarks,
continue to get those likes up, guys. Double tap that screen or click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up. It helps out the channel. Subscribe if you're new.
Our enemies without even thinking about it, overwhelming strength and devastating force. That was the quote from the president during that speech. And it gets to this question of what comes next. We know that the president, as Rachel was just saying, has cautioned and warned Iran that if they don't reach peace on his terms, that the U.S. will respond in kind with that same kind of skill, precision, and force.
Is this the beginning of WW3, guys? What's up, Cupcake?
Expected that Iran would respond in some way. Certainly that is what the Ayatollah has been telegraphing. Now it appears they are doing just that. The big question, how will the U.S. Then respond given the kind of rhetoric and language that we have heard from the president? Certainly this is going to be what the president is discussing this afternoon with the national security team.
And we are, a U.S. official is now confirming to ABC News that Iran has in fact fired missiles.
They retaliated. It's
I do want to try to bring up that video again that we're seeing from inside Doha. It looks like you can see those missiles coming in through the night sky there. This again is the largest military base in the Middle East, also has played a critical role in several conflicts. This is a video from inside Doha. Again, it looks like you can see those missiles coming in targeted at the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East. I want to bring in Ann Flaherty for a little bit more on the logistics here. Ann, what does it mean to have an attack on this base?
Wow.
Yep. So we were just getting word moments ago that a U.S. official does confirm that, in fact, Iran has fired missiles at Qatar, believed to be targeting that Al Udeid Air Force Base that we have mentioned. That is the center of the air operations for U.S. Central Command. It's a very critical base. About 10,000 troops are believed to be stationed there. U.S. officials also tell us that, look, they are prepared for this. They knew that this was a risk when President Trump had ordered that attack on Iran's nuclear sites. So they had moved equipment, assets into the region precisely for this scenario. So they are expecting this to some degree.
Continue to hit that like button, guys. It's official. Iran retaliated against the U.S.
It is able to protect itself in that airspace. But a lot of concern in this building right now about U.S. troops being targeted in this attack.
And U.S. troops around the Middle East are now being told to shelter in place. Our James Longman is in Iraq. And James, what are you seeing and hearing there? And what does this mean for troops in the region in general?
Yeah, look, it's a big moment, Diane. Everyone here knew that something was coming, and I think perhaps there was a sense that there'd be a few days, perhaps that maybe the Iranians would sort of think about what they were going to target, that it was going to be at a time of their choosing. We hear that phrase so often. Now these early reports about Qatar and the Gulf, probably the more obvious choice, given these are integral to the US operation in the Middle East and have been in the post 9/11 era. Closer to Iran, though, we did imagine that they'd be striking into places like Iraq with the Ain al-Assad base here, which has been a target for
being a member for the last 9 months.
Time and time again allied to Iran. There are some 40,000 US troops all across this region, some in those bigger bases in the Gulf, but others at much smaller outposts in places like Iraq and in Syria as well. The United States said earlier this year they wanted to reduce their footprint in Syria, take it down to about 1,000 troops in Syria. I don't think they're there yet. They will not have, most likely, the kinds of defenses that a bigger airbase in a place like Qatar will. And people at home may remember in 2020 where Donald Trump
continue to get those likes up, guys. There's 3,000 people in the building. Click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you're new.
Killed, the Iranians themselves, not their proxies in Iraq, they struck the Ain al-Assad base inside Iraq. And so that was seen as the Iranians hitting directly at the Americans rather than using a proxy. This time round, though, they have fewer proxies at their disposal. Yes, there are still militias in Iraq that still function broadly in the way that they have been before the Hamas attack on October 7th. But other proxies really have been degraded. If you just look at Syria, which sits between the two countries, of course, Bashar al-Assad,
is this the beginning of WW3, guys? Let me know.
Would help the Iranians move weapons and supplies between Iran and Lebanon, where, of course, the other major proxy existed, Hezbollah. That's still in place, but Hassan Nasrallah, again, has been wiped out by the Israelis in this post-October 7th era, which is extraordinary if you just think about the number of Iranian allies who have been neutralized since that Hamas attack. The knock-on effect of that attack has just been unbelievable. And so the Iranians now do not have a Bashar al-Assad in Syria to rely upon. They do not have as much a Hezbollah empowered in Lebanon to rely upon in order to employ these proxies to hit the Americans. And so they have to do it themselves. We are yet to know the extent
Pray for
of
us
this
all,
attack.
guys.
Look, it's been it's understood that perhaps the Iranians have used up to half of their long-range missile capability. That's the kind of capability they would need to use to strike places in the Gulf. But their rockets, their attack drones, they still have plenty of those in their arsenal, and they're still able to strike at targets closer to home. I'm talking about Iraq, where I am, and in Syria too. So
and they continue
we'll see
to
the extent to which
bombard
the Iranians really
Israel,
want to strike
guys.
back.
Not
They will
only
want
did
to
they
show
do this, they are
their
still
audience at home
dropping missiles
that they are doing something. By definition,
on Israel.
The Iranian regime defines itself in opposition to the great Satan of America, the smaller Satan of Israel, to use their phraseology. So they will have to show a public about whom they are afraid. Let's make no bones about it. There have been massive protests in Iran. They will want to show them that they are doing something. They won't want to do
Shout
too
out
much
to Reed for that
because
gift.
that would risk their own survival. Diane?
And Ian, how are they trying to ride that line, particularly in their messaging now?
It's had two statements, one from the Iranian Air Force and another, more importantly, from the Secretariat of the Supreme National Security Council. This is a governing body for matters of national security, as the title suggests.
We
but
just watched
also
the UN
presided
meet
over
yesterday.
by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
They most definitely said they would respond, and they have responded,
Let me read you
guys.
part of this statement. Whoever attacks you, attack him in the same way as he attacked you. In response to America's aggressive action and brazen act, the Islamic Republic of Iran destroyed the US airbase in Al Udeid. Well, that's clearly probably not going to be the case, and we have to wait and see what damage was inflicted on it. But interestingly, they also say the number of missiles used in this quote successful operation was the same as the number of bombs that the US had used in attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. So, I mean, this is a clear tit for tat. As I said earlier, I was in Iraq when there was retaliation by Iran for the assassination of General Soleimani. That was a calibrated response. And if they fired an equivalent number back, that might also be construed as a calibrated response, but that lies in the hands of the Trump administration. They've already put themselves out there as saying any reaction will be met by an even greater response. As James says, I think it's right. I think the regime has to portray strength domestically. It's under
Iran has responded, guys. Double tap
Many
that
of its
screen.
leaders
Subscribe
have
to
been
the channel
killed,
if you're
and
new.
there are questions being raised about how much power they continue to exercise. So it will do that. It will also be succor to their supporters throughout the region. Don't forget, at Friday prayers last Friday, we saw large-scale demonstrations. Tens of thousands of people gathered around the Arab world.
Is this the beginning of WW3? Let me know in the comments.
And this will also send a message to them, as well as, of course, to Iran's proxies. Just to go on to Iran's capabilities, what Israel is saying is Iran started with something in the region of around 8,000 of these ballistic missiles. Now, it's not saying it's destroyed half of those. What it's saying is it's destroyed half of its capability to launch these missiles. And that is an important distinction. Israeli officials that we've been speaking to also say there is a bottleneck in its ability to fire back. But as James says, certainly places like Qatar are close enough for them to be able to fire like this, as is Iraq and as is Syria.
And Ian, we're now hearing from the Qatari Defense Ministry. They say that the Qatari Air Defense has successfully intercepted a missile attack targeting Al Udeid Air Base. Again,
they
that is the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East.
Guys.
This news from Qatar comes after Iran had announced that it had launched that attack. I want to bring in our Chief Foreign Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz. Martha, you've spent a lot of time in this region. What do you make of this announcement now from the Qataris saying that they successfully intercepted this attack, and what does that mean for future retaliation?
Well, I've actually been inside that base there in
and
Qatar, and the command center, the heart of air operations, really the heart of the region for the U.S., that air base. I am frankly not surprised they successfully intercepted the missile attack, because they do have air defenses there in Qatar, in the air base there.
Official footage,
and
guys.
What I've heard from the Iranians is not a surprise at all. They are going to claim, as Ian and James have both said, they are going to claim that the missile attack was successful for their domestic audience. They have been crushed in the last few days by Israel, by the U.S., and they have to, in many ways, stay safe. And I think that's a real issue, Diane, too. What do they do now? How do they respond going forward? It's exactly right. In 2020, it was a calibrated
So since they attacked our base, do we retaliate, guys? Is the U.S. supposed to retaliate since they attacked our base? Let me know in the comments.
The air base in Iraq, and that did leave 100 troops with mild traumatic brain injury, but they didn't follow on with anything. I think one of the reasons they didn't follow on is because they accidentally shot down a Ukrainian commercial airliner.
Everywhere you think it's a star is not. That is actually a missile.
But I also think we really have to watch Iran still. They still have capability, and they may have taken out 50% of missile launchers or a good deal of the ballistic missiles, but they still have capability. And if they keep those missiles coming, if they aim for Iraq, if they aim for Bahrain or other bases, they're bound to have some success. And just go back to what President Trump has said in the past. He has very much said that the U.S. would respond with strength. And the U.S. and Donald Trump are
retaliate against them since they retaliated against us, guys?
Well.
And I want to bring in
Iran says it's an eye for an eye
as well. Colonel, to Martha's point, what is Iran's next move now if Qatar is saying that they were able to intercept this missile attack on this U.S. airbase there?
Yeah, Diane, I think the most interesting thing that I've heard so far is that Khamenei said that the number of rounds that they fired at Al Udeid, and maybe perhaps to other U.S. bases in the region, was limited to the same number of bombs that the U.S. used. So the minimum you could consider would be 14. There were a lot more dropped than that. There were 30 Tomahawk missiles. So we'll see how they count. If they count at 14,
they said they dropped just as many missiles on us as we dropped on them. They said we dropped 30 plus missiles. That means that they dropped 30 plus missiles. Continue to get those likes up, guys. Double tap that screen and click those three dots. Hit that thumbs up and most definitely subscribe to the channel if you're new.
In the sky. So both the Patriot and the THAAD, it's a shoot doctrine, and so you'll see 2 Patriots coming up to every inbound missile. So it's not that there are that many inbound missiles; it's that you're seeing the fire doctrine of those THAAD and Patriot batteries is to shoot 2 for every 1 incoming to make sure that they hit that missile. Another point I think that's interesting here, that obviously part of the calculus for Iran was that if they're going to shoot at other countries, even though those are U.S. bases, they are shooting at Qatar. They are declaring war on Qatar. If they shoot at UAE or KSA, it's going to be declaring war on those countries. They know that. In a sense, this makes life easier for the United States, because before we had to move in lots of naval power because we didn't want to have to ask permission of countries who didn't want to get involved.
There were no casualties that were reported, guys.
Involved, and will probably more than likely to be happy to have U.S. forces very apparent and perhaps even striking Iran from their air bases, since Iran has struck them first.
And we can actually...
There are no casualties reported. Make sure that you misspell your cuss words in the chat. Most definitely double tap that screen. That's how you hit the like button if you're on a mobile device. So click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new. Iran has most definitely responded to the U.S. attacks on Iran by launching missiles at our military base in Qatari.
See now some of those explosions over the sky in Doha, over that U.S. military base. And now we're hearing that President Trump is meeting with top advisors at the White House as we speak. Rachel, what more can you tell us about those meetings?
Well, Diane, I could tell you that we knew that this was a meeting that was on the president's schedule initially. It was supposed to be happening starting at 1 p.m. here at the White House in the Oval Office. We are now told that this meeting with the president's national security team has now been moved to the Situation Room. I was told by a senior administration official not too long before we came on the air, as we were hearing about these strikes, that the president and the White House, the Department of Defense, were closely monitoring any threats to any of our troops, including at this airbase. So now we are told by a senior defense official right now that Secretary Hegseth, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs Canes, are currently in the Situation Room meeting with the president. And as you can imagine, one of the things that they are going to be mulling over in this moment right now is how the United States is going to respond to this. Yes, they were anticipating some of this because Iran, in the lead up before the president even made a decision on whether or not he wanted to strike, was very forceful in their warnings to the United States, making it clear that strike would be met with strike, that war would be met with war, blow with blow. They warned that repeatedly. And the president, after giving the green light, moving forward with this military strike over the weekend, then put out another warning to Iran, telling them to come to the table, that diplomatic options are still available, that they want to explore diplomacy with Iran. But he did send out that very firm warning, saying that future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier. During the Pentagon press briefing over the weekend, we heard directly from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as the Secretary of Defense. They reiterated what the president said in his social media posts and also to the nation, warning of against retaliation to Iran. They said it would be in poor choice, in poor favor. But right now we know the president is still inside this meeting in the Situation Room with his national security team, Diane.
Meanwhile, James, Iran must be considering their next move as well. And it's not just military. One of the big concerns is that they could close the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, that's right. They know full well that if they decide to cause a blockade, to mine it in some way, that could disrupt global trade. Some 20% of the global oil supply passes through the straits there. So they know that that's a big move on their part. It probably would affect more the Europeans and Asia than it would the United States necessarily. But Donald Trump was keen about this particular possibility. He was actually messaging today on Truth Social saying everyone should keep oil prices low so as not to play into the hands of the enemy, he said. You know, there's what Iran does, I suppose, as spectacle, as theater. And I would suggest perhaps that shooting missiles at an airbase in Qatar, which it likely knows most of those missiles will get shot out of the air. That's the kind of thing it can sell to its domestic audience. Cutting the Strait of Hormuz, that is real economic pain it can inflict on the world. And that would ratchet up the pressure even more. likely then to get those European leaders who were trying desperately at the 11th hour to try to get in the room with the Iranians to try to get a deal before Donald Trump ordered that strike on those nuclear sites. Obviously, that didn't go anywhere. I would imagine if the Hormuz Strait was shut, that would get those Europeans back trying to push for a diplomatic solution as quickly as possible. So, look, this is still early days. We don't know if the Iranian attack will stop with Qatar. We've heard speculation that there could be other bases around the region struck. We know that Iran has form hitting bases, for example, in Iraq, where I am now, as I was telling you just a few moments ago. So it's early yet to see what Iran is going to do. Diane?
And we did report last week about aircraft being removed from that airbase as a precaution. So it sounds like the U.S. was prepared for this retaliatory strike, even if it hadn't been intercepted.
Yeah, that's right, Diane. I mean, all U.S. officials knew that this was a possibility that Iran would have to attack. It would have to strike back. As Martha was saying earlier, you know, this is almost a face-saving move that they feel that they have to go through with, of course, a very dangerous one. And last week, as you mentioned, we did report that that base had moved nearly 30 military aircraft. They've gone to other bases as this precaution. We also know that they've sent another aircraft carrier into the region, that these aircraft carriers can carry up to 60 fighter jets. All of that to help with any operation that might pop up to respond to these types of attacks, because of course, you know, everybody is very much on edge. They're very nervous because if anything were to get through and if an American were to be killed, you know, the speculation there is that President Trump would have to respond. And that's what has everyone concerned, because, you know, it goes from being this singular limited strike on Iranian nuclear sites, and then it moves into a wider war if there's this retaliation and back and forth and so forth. So, you know, a lot of this, the U.S. officials here say that they are hoping that everything, you know, that this is a one-off, that, you know, they can handle this, they can shoot these missiles down, and that calmer heads prevail. Diane?
Ian, is this response, now that Qatar is saying they intercepted it, still enough to satisfy that need for Iran to retaliate politically for them, or do you think Iranian leadership is still under pressure to do more now?
I think we have to wait and see. Do they attack U.S. bases in Iraq, potentially the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, where, interestingly, the Interior Ministry has advised people to stay indoors, seek shelter? That would certainly be a significant escalation. I think Anne's absolutely right. It depends what the report is on how much damage there is, whether U.S. personnel have been injured, but also a lot of it depends on the mood of President Trump. I think there's many people will feel this was suicidal by Iran. It's already beleaguered. It's had its key leadership killed. It's had its armed forces decimated. Israel now controls the skies. And although this may be face-saving, which shouldn't surprise us because there's form there, the response from the US to this could trigger further events inside Iran. And you've got this real danger now of this going from what felt like a localized conflict into a more regional conflict. And we have to wait and see what the response is, not just of Qatar, but of other Arab countries, especially in the Gulf, and the response of the United States. But there are real dangers here. This really is dangerous ground, that this starts to become far more regional, and that will bring in many players. It will involve the popular mobilization units inside Iraq. It potentially involves Hezbollah, who've also been active again today, and there will be consequences. Now, if the United States and others continue to try and degrade Iran's abilities just from the air, that is one thing. But if anybody is starting to suggest anything more significant, then we're in a totally different ballgame. But again, let's just be patient and wait and see exactly what the impact has been. Let's wait to hear from the President and the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But I would say,
is this the beginning of WW3, guys?
If it didn't look tenuous already, it certainly does now. Remember, Israel specifically targeted the instruments that are used by the Iranian regime for suppression inside the country, the Basij, which is a kind of domestic security force that's used to enforce Iran's draconian laws, for example, against women, against protesters. They also targeted the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They also dropped a
That's
bomb
what they
near
say
a
in
prison,
Fan
an infamous
101.
prison
This is
inside
maybe
Iran,
the
used
beginning
to house
of
political
WW3.
prisoners. And Israel's defense minister has
Will
made
we
no
respond,
bones of the
guys?
fact that this is about unsettling the regime and its grip on power. And you also had that late night posting by President Trump when he also raised the question of whether regime change would be bad. And as much as officially US and Israeli officials want to ignore that, it's starting to become a more and more pertinent question.
And Colonel Ganyard, how does Qatar go about repelling an attack like this and intercepting these missiles?
Dan, obviously for decades now, the U.S. has been interested in this region and considered Iran a threat. And so all of the Gulf states are tied in with the U.S. in very intricate, very sophisticated air and missile defense systems. So there are radars and links between countries that have radars. And so what we call the air picture over the Persian Gulf is probably covered like no other place in the world. So the ability to share that information, to share inbound missiles that are coming in.
Somebody said who's speaking in the background. The channel broadcaster, duh. Make sure you double tap that screen. Most definitely, that's how you hit the like button. Click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up. Most definitely subscribe to the channel if you are new. Man, Iran has retaliated against the U.S. by striking one of our military bases in Qatar or however you say it. You know what I'm saying? All the same thing. The pronunciation may be wrong, but it's all the same information, man. This is crazy. Do y'all think that us, America, should retaliate?
And to be able to hand those off to various kinds of surface air missile defense capabilities is quite extraordinary. It's like no other place in the world where you have this much information sharing between countries. The missile systems like the THAAD and the Patriot can actually do what we've seen in Israel with some of their systems, and they can actually, as they track the inbound missiles, they can actually calculate where that missile is going to land. And if that missile is going to land, say, outside the fence line in a deserted area outside of Al-Udeid Air Base, the system will not go after it. They'll just let it fall harmlessly in an open spot. They only go after, they calculate only those missiles that would hit either a residential area, an industrial area, a military base. Those are the ones they go after, but they have that ability to discern where the impact point is going to be and make a judgment on whether they should intercept that inbound missile.
And again, for anyone just joining us, we were looking at video from just moments ago of an Iranian missile attack on a U.S. airbase in Qatar. The Qataris have said they've intercepted that attack, but we are, of course, waiting to see and hear of any damage there. This is the largest U.S. airbase in all of the Middle East and has played a critical role in so many different conflicts, including Iraq, Afghanistan, strikes on Syria, and so forth. We are now, again, waiting to see the extent of the damage there, if any, but Qatar has said that they have managed to intercept a lot of that attack, if not all of it. And this could still play a critical role in the region. I want to go back to Colonel Steve Ganyard, who's walking us through a little bit about how this attack was intercepted and the protections at play. Actually, let's go to Rachel Scott, who's been following the reaction from the White House now. Rachel, we know the president is in the Situation Room now meeting with top leaders. Given this attack was intercepted, if there isn't a lot or any damage for that matter to the base, how much pressure is on President Trump?
Russia has threatened to enter the battle, guys.
Politically, this puts President
news.
Trump in a very
Russia
tricky position. The president has been very clear,
battle,
very direct, that any response from Iran will be met with a far greater response from the United States. But remember, President Trump, as a candidate, campaigned on getting the United States out of foreign conflict. He described himself as a peacemaker, even in his inaugural address. And so you have had this split in the Republican Party. And the president, over the last several days, I was told, was getting a series of phone calls from Republicans on Capitol Hill on different ends of the spectrum about whether the United States should get involved. Some, like Senator Lindsey Graham, urging the president for direct U.S. involvement. Others cautioning the president against it, saying that the United States needs to take a step back here and can support Israel as an ally and a friend, but doesn't need to be directly involved. We know the president's calculus on this started to change. Sources tell me that U.S. officials started to realize that Iran maybe wasn't serious about coming to the table for these nuclear talk discussions.
This is crazy.
I was also told in the last several days by sources that there was this urgent last-minute attempt to try to get Iranian officials and also U.S. officials in one room, and that President Erdogan of Turkey was trying to broker this meeting, speaking with the president directly at the G7 summit. We know that the president then ended his trip to the G7 summit in Canada abruptly. He traveled right back here to the White House, and every day since then he has been meeting with his national security team and his advisors, going over any potential threats to the United States and also the next movements here.
Y'all,
but again, the president was very clear about this. In addition to not only warning Iran not to retaliate against the United States, we also heard from the president on social media just yesterday talking about the possibility of regime change. The president saying that it's not politically correct to use that term, but he went on to say that if the Iran supreme leader cannot make Iran great again, why not consider regime change? I had a chance to speak to the White House press secretary earlier today, and I asked her, what did the president exactly mean by that? Is he calling for the United States to get involved to accomplish that? Is he calling for Israel to get involved to accomplish that? Or is he talking about the Iranians? And she was very clear with me that the president was speaking about the Iranian people, saying that it's up to them to decide if they want to rise up to tackle that regime if they don't come to the table for diplomacy. Diane.
Rachel, thank you. Andy, and I want to go back to you because we're now hearing the first reaction from Israel to this attack.
We just hit 34K, guys.
Yeah, that's right. This was a spokesman for the chief spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces, Effie Defrin, General Effie Defrin. He was asked about Iran's attacks on U.S. bases, saying that we're following developments that are being reported. We are in touch with our partners in the region. And of course, Israel regards this as more proof of the violence, that Iran is a terrorist state that threatens not just Israel, but the region and the world. We're also hearing from Bahraini state television that they have closed their airspace. The Interior Ministry in Bahrain, which of course is home to the US Fifth Fleet, had essentially issued an order advising people to stay at home. Now, no indications that anything has happened there, but it's just worth reiterating that the concerns about what just happened in Qatar are not just felt in that country, but I think throughout the Gulf region. But again, just to be very clear, we need to know whether any of these got through. A US official speaking to ABC News has essentially said that the Qataris and the Americans were involved in the shoot-downs. They're also saying that they
this is crazy, y'all. Iran has retaliated,
landed
guys.
in Al-Udeid Air Base. Interestingly, Press TV, which is the pro-Iranian or Iranian government television, is claiming
we
that
got
they did
more. They're
land
talking
there,
about
but
it
no
on
evidence
another
of that.
station. Hold up.
And what more are you
Continue
hearing
to
about
double
the
tap
way
that
these
screen,
missiles were
guys. They
intercepted?
are most definitely talking about this situation on a whole nother station. Let's go over there. You know, they are live right now responding to this whole situation, man. This is wild.
If you're going to stir a hornet's nest, you have to act decisively. I think Gulf countries are exposed. They can't counterpunch in the same way that the United States can. They've positioned themselves differently. They've put out MFA statements, bending over backward to stay out of the line of fire with Iran. They probably appreciated how much U.S. strikes were advertised as coming from the U.S. Homeland and submarines and not from the Gulf.
Exercise the
They've been
Fair Use
actively trying
Act
to
of
de-escalate,
1976,
including
guys.
at the moment
We are
when
most
strikes
definitely
landed,
news
I think you can
reporting,
expect them
and
to
this
keep
is for
doing that.
educational purposes
As a colleague of
only.
mine says, the G3, Saudi, Qatar, UAE, I think are probably closer to this White House in some cases than the E3 of England, France, and Germany. And I suspect that Gulf states have been privately messaging Moscow to quietly tell the Iranians to take this deal. The last thought is that I think we're going to need to find a way to marry up the military with the diplomatic and larger strategy at some point. Israel has accomplished a huge amount militarily. It sure seems like we accomplished something significant too, although we'll find out exactly what. Step one is to manage retaliation from Iran, but then I think step two is going to be to figure out how to convert something military and quite successful into something that's much more durable. The Diplomacy with Iran is hard under the best of circumstances and maybe impossible under these. But the next steps when it comes to things like disposing of stockpiles and monitoring, there's a certain amount you can do with military and intelligence, but some of it is probably going to come down to diplomacy. Now, Iran, for its part, knows that nobody is eager to come in on the ground, and it may well seek to weather this storm and claim victory just by surviving the air campaign. They're badly weakened by a series of missteps since October 7th, but I think the regime still gets a vote in what happens next, and if they double down on defiance, then what I think we hope is a one-off could well turn out to be a more sustained conflict. With that, let me pass it back.
That's a great set of comments initially, Dan. Thank you for that. Colby, we got a bunch of people in our audience who are very interested in the energy markets. Take us through your area of expertise, please.
Sure, thanks, Ken. So, you know, the update since the events of the weekend is, you know, the general statement is something that nobody will be surprised to hear, which is that these developments point towards greater risks and not fewer. This brings us closer to the possibility of a disruption in the flow of oil and gas supplies from the Gulf. Seeing things this morning like the shelter-in-place order for U.S. citizens in Qatar, Japanese banks considering pulling staff from the region. You know, the market did react accordingly when oil began trading again last night. Brent crude spiked above $80 per barrel, as would be expected in a situation like this. But, you know, as we were getting started with this session, it had receded a bit and it was trading at a lower level than it closed out last week. So, you know, these new developments tend to cause a spike. The risk sort of gets baked in.
Let's jump over here. Hold up.
And as we don't
They
have
ain't
more
talking about
development.
nothing. Let's go over here, man. You know what I'm saying? I see a dude with a high G bone. You know what I'm saying? Basically speaking on all this. Let's go travel over there. Let's see what's going on.
استمرار التصعيد في المنطقة لن ينتج عنه.
Man, I don't know what
إلا
he's saying
تقويض
though.
الأمن والاستقرار ليس في هذه المنطقة فحسب بل في العالم أجمع.
We need a translator. I don't know what he's saying.
ليس من خيار أمام جميع الأطراف وأمام جميع دول المنطقة إلا العودة للسبل السلمية.
What is he saying?
العودة إلى طاولة المفاوضات.
We need a
والعودة
translator.
إلى البحث عن خيار السلام لتحقيقه لشعوبنا جميعا. قطر حذرت مرارا وتكرارا من مغبة التصعيدات الإسرائيلية في المنطقة، من مغبة هذه السلوكيات غير المسؤولة والتي نرى آثارها اليوم في منطقتنا جمعاء. وعلى صعيد الجاهزية فإنه ومنذ تصاعد التهديدات تجاه القواعد التي تشهد تواجدا أمريكيا في منطقتنا، اتخذت دولة قطر كافة الإجراءات الاحترازية ما نتج عنه فشل الهجوم وحماية قطر وشعبها من تبعاته. ونحن نعتبر هذا الهجوم مفاجئا في ظل مواقف دولة قطر وحرصها على حسن الجوار واتهامها الوساطة لحل الأزمات. دولة قطر كانت ولا زالت وستظل ما شاء الله لها أن تظل مؤمنة بخيار السلام وتحقيقه، ساعية نحو أن تكون نبراسا لهذا السلام عالميا، ولن تردعها ولن تثنيها أي ممارسات خاطئة من أي طرف كان في إطار أي تصعيد في المنطقة، عن أن تكون قوة دافعة للسلام في منطقتنا وفي العالم. وهذا يذكرنا بأن نشكر مواقف جميع الدول الشقيقة والصديقة المتضامنة مع دولة قطر في إطار هذا الهجوم، ونقدم لهم الشكر على وقفتهم هذه، وهي وقفة مشرفة بلا شك في ظل ما تعرضت له دولة قطر. ونطمئن السادة المواطنين وأن الحياة اليوم تعود في هذه اللحظات إلى طبيعتها بدون أي تهديد يذكر بعد أن تم صد هذا الهجوم. هناك مجموعة من الإجراءات التي سوف يتم الإعلان عنها من قبل السادة الذين معي اليوم، ولكن أود أن أؤكد كذلك بأنه وفي إطار حرص وزارة التعليم على مصلحة الطلبة والطالبات سيتم تأجيل الامتحانات ليوم واحد فقط بحيث تعود إلى جدولها الطبيعي الأربعاء القادم كما تم الإعلان عنه منذ وقت قريب. والآن اسمحوا لي أن أقدم لكم
He said,
في هذا
effed up.
المؤتمر
I
سعادة
heard that
اللواء
part too.
شايق بن صفر الهاجري نائب رئيس الأركان للعمليات المشتركة ليقدم لنا إحاطة حول المعلومات العسكرية حول الهجوم الذي تم صده اليوم. تفضل سعادة اللواء.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام.
Oh man, everybody talking a foreign language. I don't understand none myself. I heard him say somebody effed up and salami. I heard
وزارة
that.
الدفاع برفع جاهزيتها واستعداداتها للتعامل مع الانعكاسات لهذه الأزمة. وبعد مشاركة
Alright, let's go back to America, guys. Let's go back to America. I can't understand nothing they saying but self-salami. Well, U.S. has closed its bases in Qatar, well, however you say it. The U.S. closed their bases.
Midnight Hammer was an epic operation that caught Iran completely off guard. As they say, our bomber pilots are now back home in Missouri. And President Trump thanked them in a post last night for a job well done, exclamation point all caps. We're learning more about the many levels of deception and decoy. It was like a James Bond movie that went into this mission. The real strike force went east toward the heavily fortified nuclear facility at Fordow. Those B-2 bombers dropped a dozen bunker buster bombs on Fordow alone, each weighing 30,000 pounds, and they never once encountered enemy fire. Chief National Correspondent, Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon. I tell you, you just can't stop being wowed by what we pulled off, Jennifer.
An absolutely flawless mission. But Harris, U.S. military forces are now on high alert across the Middle East, expecting an imminent response from Iran. The U.S. Navy actively planning its response should Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy mine the Strait of Hormuz. Few here at the Pentagon think this is over, despite Saturday's flawless military strike on Iran's 3 nuclear facilities, a plan that has been honed and practiced since 2008. U.S. B-2 pilots have been practicing this 37-hour round-trip flight to the Middle East for years. The 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs tested against hardened targets as recently as last year.
Iran has retaliated, guys.
This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military. As the president clearly said last night, no other military in the world could have done this.
125 U.S. warplanes, each B-2 refueled in midair 3 to 4 times each way on the nonstop 18-hour flight from Missouri. An air refueling bridge across the Mediterranean and Middle East, 14 GBU-57 bunker buster bombs among the 75 satellite-guided munitions dropped, and 30 Tomahawk missiles fired from an Ohio-class submarine 400 miles away, which stayed in the air 1 hour and 40 minutes, time to drop after the last B-2 struck in Fordow. Captain Todd Sawhill, an intelligence targeting officer focused on this problem for years, was asked whether the Tomahawks could destroy Isfahan and the deep tunnels where the Iranian uranium conversion takes place.
We also use submarines, guys.
No, in that case, it's extremely limited because those weapons are really designed to go after surface targets. They don't have much penetration capability. The problem is, like you mentioned, the mountain, which is deep under hard granite and unreachable by conventional munitions, to include the GBU-57.
Isfahan is arguably a tougher target, Harris, than Fordow. The U.S. will be using signals intelligence and other means to sniff for nuclear particles at the sites, along with Israeli human intelligence on the ground to give the final bomb damage assessment, Harris.
Yeah, and the world awaits to see what that will hold. Jennifer, we have breaking news right now, and it's partially on what you were talking about. Qatar's foreign minister now has just announced it is shutting down its airspace to all commercial flights indefinitely. And we know just a few minutes ago that the U.S. issued a shelter-in-place order for Americans in Qatar. What does all of this tell you?
Well, there's very significant intelligence and a warning that Iran could strike at any time, an imminent threat to Qatar. Of course, Qatar is where Al Udeid is. That's the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East. Normally, there would be 10,000 U.S. troops stationed there. Last week, we reported that most of the aircraft had been moved from Al Udeid. However, those missiles, cruise and ballistic, short and medium range from Iran would could take just a few minutes to reach Qatar, and there's also the possibility of swarming drones. So right now, high alert inside Qatar. We've seen the warnings at the U.S. Embassy, as well as at other embassies across Qatar.
I'm so glad you're on with us at this moment, because following a U.S. security alert for U.S. nationals in Qatar out of an abundance of caution, we've recommended that British nationals in Qatar also shelter in place until further notice. So this is ramping up, and what we do know is our military is at the ready. They've been pulling into place for a couple of weeks now, even.
And y'all got on me for saying Qatar and Qatari. Now they saying Qatar. Which one is it? I'm just saying. Either way, it all mean the same thing. I don't hear nobody saying nothing to them. But anyway.
Jennifer, thank you very much. Always appreciate your reporting. More on the breaking news. Out of that region, KT McFarland served as Deputy National Security Advisor during President Trump's first administration. So hitting our troops in that region, Iran has done so many times before, over 200 times under President Biden. It is time we respond. What do you foresee just out of these warnings from Qatar?
Well, Iran's going to retaliate. The question is, how are they going to retaliate, and how successful will they be? I mean, the most they could do is to try to take out U.S. forces or attack U.S. forces in the region. But as you pointed out, we're ready for that. We've brought more assets into the region to defend our bases, our people. We've taken dependence, civilian dependence, out of the region, so to make a smaller target, if you will. And we've also, particularly Israel, has degraded the capability of Iran to have those kind of attacks. So we're ready, but we're expecting to take the blow, but we're ready. I mean, Iran could also go after Israeli facilities in the region or bomb Israel again. But again, their ability to do so has been greatly reduced. We know they're going to do something. The question is what, and would it trigger the response that President Trump has talked about? You know, they've got to all be nervous. I mean, they've shown that Donald Trump has shown that he's not a patsy. He's not going to believe that, oh, well, we want to negotiate. He's got to do what he has to do to protect Americans.
And what I hear you getting at is they have to be really careful when they make this next move. I mean, it's like walking on toothpicks on top of a lily pad. You can't be too heavy-footed or you'll go into water and you don't know how deep it is. I mean, Trump is willing to do what is necessary, right? I mean, it's just that tricky. I have parents from the South, so I have a lot of those little things.
Retaliated, guys.
Look, what you're saying is they've got to try to hit us, but not hit us too hard. I don't know if they can pull that off. Many of their military commanders were taken out by Israel.
And the ones that remain know that if they could be taken out as well. I mean, it's pretty clear that Mossad has thoroughly penetrated the Iranian military, the Iranian civilian leadership. And if they try to do something that would, especially something that would cause loss of American life, they might as well pull the trigger on their own heads. What President Trump was interested in when he's talked about regime change. Now, regime change in the George W. Bush, Barack Obama sense is American Marines go in, we get rid of the guy, we put our own government in, we try to figure out how they should become a modern American democracy. And it's never worked. It didn't work in Afghanistan, didn't work in Iraq, didn't work in Libya. President Trump has said to the Iranian people, look, you should have leaders who make your country great again. It's up to you. And he said consistently throughout his 2 terms that it's up to the people to decide their own country. You decide what kind of a government you want, what leaders you want, how you worship your God. It's up to you. If you want to do regime change, that's on you, but we might applaud it if you do this in the case of Iran.
So a few minutes ago, when Ambassador Danone was here, he was telling me, and it seems like a point of desperation, we were both agreeing off camera, and then the conversation ensued. He said that they are hiring prisoners coming out of jails in Israel. Iran is doing this, trying to find the angriest among them to see if they can flip them as assets and give them menial tasks, he said. They'll send them, take a picture over here, you get a little bit of change for that, until they work them up into doing something worse.
That's an act of desperation, right? I mean, the Ayatollah we know is in hiding. He already has decided he's going to be a martyr. He's 86 years old. He's dying of cancer. What a great way to go out. He's already designated 3 people who would be his successors. But you have to wonder what's the conversations they're having within the leadership group of Iran. Because of the generals looking at each other and say, I've had this job for 48 hours now. My predecessor was assassinated. I want to keep this job. Did I sign up for this? Did I sign up for martyrdom? And maybe, as President Trump says, the Iranian people want to make Iran great again. President Trump's offering an opportunity to come to the negotiating table and extend the hand of freedom and peace.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Iran looks for enemies within the countries that it would like to have death of.
All right,
Katie
more
McFarland, great to
breaking
have you.
news,
Thank
guys.
you so much.
More
Thank you for
breaking
watching the
news.
Faulkner Focus.
More breaking news on this situation. Man, this is crazy, y'all. Should we retaliate? Let me know if we should retaliate against the people who retaliated against us.
United States would be able to intercept those missiles coming in. So really light on detail right now as far as the gravity of this and how many missiles have been fired or intercepted. But yes, we can confirm that something is underway at the Al Udeid base. Defenses are up, troops are sheltering in place, and we don't know if this is just the first of many or whether it's the last.
Okay, Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon. Thank you. Let's bring in Holly Williams.
Continue to get those likes up, guys. Click those three dots.
Holly, what are you hearing? What's the temperature where you are?
Hey there, John. Well, Iran state media is reporting that Iran has launched a missile operation called Annunciation of Victory or Blessings of Victory, depending on the translation, against U.S. bases here in Iraq and in Qatar. Now, you heard just then from Charlie about the situation.
He's talking about what's the breaking news, Pokemon ball. I'm going to get you right up out of here acting like you don't know what's going on. Iran retaliated against the U.S. That's the breaking news. Asked again, I'm going to deport you. Keep an eye on Pokemon ball down there.
At the Al Udeid base in Qatar. The Reuters news agency is reporting that U.S. forces at the Al Assad base here in Iraq have been placed on maximum alert and ordered to shelter in bunkers. We'll update you with any more information regarding that. Now, of course, this is not unexpected. Iran's foreign minister said following the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites that his country had to respond. We spoke to one Middle Eastern security expert who said that essentially the Iranian regime did have to respond because otherwise it risked looking weak and being humiliated in front of its own people. Before this happened, U.S. forces here in the Middle East, and there were around 40,000 U.S. troops here in the Middle East, along with bases scattered across the region. They had been placed on high alert because of a possible Iranian retaliation.
Holly Williams, thank you very much for that update.
What's up,
we'll be back to you in a moment. Joining us now is CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. Sam, what do you make of these reports here in this retaliation for the attacks over the weekend that we knew was coming? What do you make of what we know so far?
John, scary moment for sure, but this is exactly what security officials have been preparing for some time. As Charlie noted, this is the home of U.S. Central Command. There are a range of critical assets at this base, drones, aircraft, and more, used for all kinds of operations, including counterterrorism operations. The Qatari Emiri Air Force is also at this base, and all members of the U.S. military have been further adding assets in and around Al Udeid and other large military installations in the region to prevent retaliatory attacks. So as Charlie noted, this may be symbolic in nature. They attacked at a very well-defended base. Iran has a long history of attacking U.S. military facilities in the region, so to a certain extent, we expected this moment. The unknown question at this time is whether this is it, or if Iran is planning to...
So Trump said any retaliatory actions, you know, that we will retaliate. And this is most definitely a retaliatory act. Should we retaliate, guys, or should we leave it alone, seeing that there were no U.S. soldiers that were hurt, you know, in all of this? Should we leave it alone, or should we retaliate? Let me know. Let's get RLC right up out of here. Go where you think is popping at. We further,
you got deported. From attacking a well-defended base to potentially civilian targets, and that's why the U.S. government is warning civilians to shelter in place to the extent possible. I will note I do have sources indicating that this intelligence was received relatively recently, and that they are combing through intelligence sources to identify again whether this was a one-off or there's more to come.
Sam Vinograd, thank you so much. The pictures we're showing you are near where this base is in Qatar. We're not showing you live pictures of the base, but it's near it. So those are the pictures you're seeing. I'm not going to make a guess at what we're actually seeing for the moment, but let's go where we have fresh reporting from Weijia Zhang, who is at the White House. Weijia, I understand the president was about to or is in a national security meeting when this news broke.
And John, to be clear, that meeting was already on the books for inside the Oval Office with members of his national security team. What we are working to find out right now is whether they have all moved into the Situation Room as they monitor what is unfolding before us. And as Sam just pointed out, this is not necessarily a shock because
we are 60
sources here
likes
said they were
away from
anticipating
800,
some
guys.
kind of response.
Remember to double
and we
tap
know
that screen
that
if
in
you're on a mobile
January
device.
of 2020,
Or
when the U.S. took out Iranian military general Qasem Soleimani, this is exactly how the Iranians responded, attacking U.S. air bases in the region that led to dozens of members of the military suffering from traumatic brain injury. So this is something that was always possibly anticipated, but the president and all of his top advisors were signaling that Iran had a choice. They were urging Tehran to come back to the negotiating table and hash out a deal to abandon their nuclear program.
Shout out to
but John,
everybody
just
that
this morning,
subscribed to
the
the
Iranian mission to the United Nations posted
40 more likes,
on social
guys.
media
We'll be at
that the
800
U.S.
on that like.
destroyed
Can we get
diplomacy.
800
They
likes?
added that
Click the three
the
dots, hit
offer,
the
the
thumbs
so-called
up.
offer, quote, was nothing more than a deceitful ploy. So now the question is how the U.S. will respond, because the president has already said if Iran chose not to take the path of diplomacy and chose something else, he said there would be severe consequences. John.
Weijia Zhang at the White House. Thank you, Weijia. Joining us now is retired Air Force Lieutenant General Mark Wetherington. General, thank you for being with us. Your immediate reaction to what you've heard.
Well, thanks, John. Glad to be here. And I'm not surprised by this. I think we all expected some form of retaliation was coming. A little bit of surprise that they'd pick one of those locations, because that obviously widens the conflict with one of their neighbors. And Iran and Qatar share the largest natural gas field in the world. And so it's a significant relationship that they have there. But Al Udeid is one of the most important force projection platforms we have in the theater. It's the largest tanker base in the region. It's a significant hub for military activity. And so we shouldn't be surprised. And I know General Kurilla at CENTCOM has been thinking through these force protection decisions.
Given that we shouldn't be surprised, and this is basically, as I gather, the biggest target that Iran could hit, one of the questions is it symbolic in that I'm coming right to your front door, or is it symbolic in that we must respond to something, and therefore we're going to fire missiles somewhere where the U.S. has a really good chance of defending against them?
Well, I'm not sure I can get inside what Iran might be thinking, but I think certainly they wanted to respond, and this is one of the initial steps that they could take, right? They still have some short-range capability. Israel has done a lot to attrit their medium-range capabilities that can strike Tel Aviv, and so a shorter-range target is probably significant. I still think the most important target to the Iranians is likely a U.S. warship in the region, because that's sovereign U.S. territory on the sea, and presents a very, important target to them that wouldn't also be a challenge because of their neighbors in the region.
Our Margaret Brennan is reporting 6 missiles have been fired at the base. What kinds of defenses would they have at the base for these kinds of short-range missiles, which we understand they are?
Yeah, John, we've traditionally had some short-range air defense and medium-range air defense capabilities. You think Patriot. Regionally, there's going to be an air defense laydown that's going to support all the critical assets and defended assets in the region, and that's something that U.S. Central Command will look at, and I'm sure Al Udeid is prioritized very high on that list.
Okay, excellent, General. We'll be back to you in a moment. Margaret Brennan, moderator of Face the Nation,
guys,
joining us with some new reporting. Margaret.
Hi, John. Well, I've been talking to diplomats in the region who are telling me that this was expected.
I don't know whether we should retaliate or not,
been
guys.
A calibrated response by Iran using short-range missiles.
If we retaliate, then they gonna retaliate, which gonna keep this whole thing going.
That message from Iran back that they felt compelled they had to send. So the United States, as we know,
we are 20 likes away from 800, guys. I know we got 20 people who haven't hit the like button. Click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new. This is everything we know of what's going on with Iran in the attack on Qatar, guys. Get those likes
in
up.
Qatar and in other areas, by the way. I've been in touch with other Gulf nation officials as well who are bracing bracing. They have been bracing for days, to be frank, concerned that their association with the United States would make them targets.
Shout
now,
out
these
to
U.S.
everybody that's
bases that are on the territory of
Shout
countries
out to
like
everybody
Bahrain
that's
and
speaking.
Kuwait
I see y'all
and
down there saying
Qatar
hi.
are well
Shout
fortified.
out to everybody speaking.
But there is that risk, of course, that a missile could land outside that range. Now, CENTCOM is monitoring the air. We know that would be expected since these countries are within that region of responsibility. But this is exactly what many of these Arab states had wondered. I asked the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, just yesterday, what is the U.S. policy if an ally is hit, and would the United States defend them? And his response
Some people saying no, don't
retaliate. U.S. bases
I see y'all saying no retaliate. Man, I don't know how to feel.
Everyone is waiting to see
Shout
what
out to
more
Texas.
could
I'm
come.
from Texas as
These
well.
are well-fortified
Born and
institutions.
raised.
Those other
Texas
concerns
in
we've
the
been
building.
talking about at CBS for days, sleeper cells, low-level terror attacks, those things are harder to gauge against. And we do know that on the Homeland front here in America, officials have been talking about planning for that as well.
Good evening and
Margaret,
salute
you
to
used the
everybody
word calibrated.
entering. Make sure y'all double tap that screen.
The previous during
if
the
you're on a mobile
campaign made
device,
some references
click
to
those three
that
dots, hit that
retaliatory
thumbs up,
act that
and
Iran
most
took
definitely
in
subscribe
response
to
to
the
the
channel,
killing of
guys.
Qasem
It helps out the
Soleimani.
channel.
And he
Salute
suggested
to
in his
everybody
remarks
in the building.
that it was that the Iranian response was kind of calibrated. In other words, almost with a theatrical quality. Something had to be done to satisfy domestic pressure, but that it was not on a scale of 1 to 10, say a 10 response. Is that the way in which you mean calibrated in terms of this early action that we're learning about just now?
Shout out to South Africa.
Precisely. In that 2020 attack, we know from the then head of CENTCOM, General McKenzie, who's written about it, talked about it on our air because he was preparing the theater at the time. They saw.
Who all do we have in the building, man? I'm from Texas. Shout out to Texas. Shout out to South Africa. Where y'all representing from? Where are you guys located? Let me know. West Point, Texas, in the building. What's up, man? Shout out to everybody, man. You know, breaking news as far as on my end. Iran has retaliated against the United States. Should we retaliate? Shout out to Dubai. Shout out to Berlin, Germany. Make sure y'all subscribing. Shout out to Arizona, Lubbock, Texas, Port Arthur, Texas, South Carolina. Shout out to y'all. Texas via Waco. What's up? Shout out to you, Charlotte in the building. Philly. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Odessa. Man, Texas is deep in here. Shout out to Jacksonville, Arkansas. What's up? Shout out to the UK. Shout out to Florida. I see y'all, the UK. Most definitely, man. Hey, man, this is something that affects us all as far as viewing the United States, man. This is crazy. I don't know. Shout out to Houston, guys. What's up, New Orleans? Arizona in the building. North Carolina. Shout out to Oakland. Yeah, man, shout out to everybody in here, man. Make sure y'all double tapping that screen. Get those likes up. It most definitely helps the channel. If you ain't hit that like button, hit it. You know, I'm giving y'all a shout out. El Paso in the building. What's up? Y'all voted for this, somebody says. California up in here. What's up? Keeping it trill in Texas. Let's go. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. You know, most definitely appreciate everybody being in here. Manchester, Oregon. What's up, man? Kenya in the building. What's up? Bronx, New York. Lubbock, Texas. All right. The Bay Area. What's up? Virginia Beach in here, Atlanta. What's up? Shout out to everybody, man. Continue to get those likes up and subscribe if you're new. Oklahoma City. Shout out to y'all, man. They told me y'all was y'all either won the championship or was finna win it in Oklahoma. Which one is it? Let me know. South Africa in the building. Florida once again, Australia, Chicago, Illinois, Sacramento. What's up? Ireland. Let's go. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I think it is. It says PA. What's up, y'all? Shout out to everybody in the building. Yeah, we won already, man. Congratulations to Oklahoma, man. Bravo, Iran. Oh, my goodness. They won. Okay. Yeah, what's up, Ballin? San Antonio. Okay, let's get back to it, guys. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Make sure you share out the live stream. You know, if you have a community wall or a way to share it out. Shout out to Alberta, Canada, St. Louis, Missouri. What's up? St. Louis City, Mo, 97 degrees. What's up, y'all? Shout out to everybody.
The Iranian missiles get ready to launch. They saw where they were targeting. They knew when it was coming. So that doesn't mean it's without risk. There were troops on that airbase that was hit by Iran back in 2020 who suffered traumatic brain injuries, but there was no death. And so they're mitigating risk, the United States behind the scene, whether it's military officials, and I'm sure our Pentagon folks are tracking closely, or if it's diplomats. And we also know on the Homeland Security front that Homeland Security officials in the United States are also trying to plan
Iran retaliated against the U.S. by attacking the U.S.
army base in Qatar.
That's what happened.
Does he let this go? Do his military advisors say to him, this is calibrated, it could have been worse? Or does he choose to slap back again? That's a question on that escalation ladder that analysts are going to be watching closely. But for our close allies in the region, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, they are very concerned that something may be coming to them and that the strike at Qatar that we're seeing may not be the end of it. The place that U.S. officials have been most concerned about vulnerability for America
there were no
is in Iraq.
casualties.
And those forces, that small force we still have in Syria. And I know Iraqi officials have been on alert. There was an ordered departure of Americans from our bases and diplomatic posts a few weeks back. So there has been some expectation that this is the kind of thing that could be happening.
Margaret Brennan, thank you. Margaret was saying that the U.S. has been preparing and ready for this, and Qatar reporting comes in, reporting, I believe, attributed to the authorities in Qatar saying that they have successfully intercepted missiles targeting a U.S. base. So the U.S. saw it coming and appears to have intercepted those missiles. Let's turn to Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, the president was just at this base in Qatar about a month ago.
That's right, John. I was there covering him, and it's no surprise that he chose this particular base to visit, Al Udeid. It is the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, home to 10,000 U.S. troops. They share that massive base with British troops and Qatari troops as well. It's about an hour or so outside Doha. It goes on for miles, and it has been a crucial outpost for the United States, both when it comes to counterterrorism and when it comes to past conflicts in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And it may be no surprise as well, John, that this attack took place right at 1 p.m. Eastern time, just as White House officials were heading into a meeting with the President of the United States, with Pentagon officials as well, to discuss the situation with Iran. And now the question becomes, as Margaret pointed out, what, if anything, does the president do in response? This was a well signposted response by Iran. It didn't necessarily catch anyone by surprise. Is the president going to decide, you know what, they had to do this in order to save face domestically in Iran, and we're going to let it go? Or does the president seek to escalate? That's certainly something that Democrats on Capitol Hill have been very worried about, is how far does this go, even though the White House says that it strikes over the weekend on Iranian nuclear sites. We're self-contained. We're not meant to lead to further action. Once you see military strikes like this back and forth, what comes next is always unpredictable.
Indeed it is. Nancy Cordes, thank you. Let's bring back in Holly Williams, who's in Erbil, Iraq. Holly, I don't know if you heard Margaret Brennan was saying that one of the most vulnerable possible areas for an Iranian strike would be in Iraq. You mentioned earlier that Al-Assad Air Base is on the highest alert.
Right, so Margaret talked about the vulnerability of US forces here in Iraq and in neighboring Syria. We are just a few miles from a US base here in Erbil in northern Iraq, and I spent time on some of those small US military outposts in Syria. I thought Margaret's reporting suggesting that this was a calibrated response is just fascinating, perhaps suggesting that this is almost, I guess, a face-saving operation, for want of a better word, on the part of the Iranians, that they need to not look weak in front of their regional rivals Qatar and their own people. But I would say this, back in 2020, Iran targeted the Al-Assad base here in Iraq with ballistic missiles. That followed the US killing a top Iranian military commander. We were on that base, on Al-Assad base, just a few days later, and we saw the extensive damage that had been done. Now, no American service members were killed, but some people would argue that that was good luck.
Holly, I want to just hold on to that. You know, we're talking about calibrated response. There is a theatricality a little bit here, but just to underscore your point, which is that it may have been calibrated, but calibrated missiles explode just like ones that are sent with other intent.
There's always the risk of miscalculation and human error. I think the bigger picture here is we don't know how this is going to play out. If it indeed was a calibrated, as you say, almost a theatrical response, then do we also see diplomatic wheels turning? Do we see Iran capitulating or at least agreeing to curtail its nuclear program? Or does this potentially spiral out of control into a bigger regional war?
Exactly. Holly Williams, thank you. Let's bring back in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. Sam, tell us what steps have been taken here at home, and would this change anything in terms of readiness and preparations here if Iran somehow wanted to try to respond in the United States?
Sure, John. I will also note, just closing out the overseas element, that I do have sources indicating that the White House is anticipating additional strikes on U.S. bases overseas. And as I mentioned previously, the U.S. government has taken significant precautions to protect our members of the military to the greatest extent possible. Here in the U.S., security officials at the federal level have done outreach calls with their partners at the state and local level, with governors, with major law enforcement and religious associations, in anticipation of Iranian retaliation here at home. That could be individuals directed by Iran to launch attacks, part of their global proxy network. They spend decades cultivating a surrogate network here in the United States, what we call sleeper cells in layman's terms, or individuals inspired by what's happened overseas to act, individuals we call homegrown violent extremists. Potential targets likely will be people and places associated with the U.S. military, people and places associated with the U.S. government, members of the Jewish community, and people and places associated with the state of Israel. Now, intelligence gathering is at a very high level at this time to look for threats, and law enforcement has already significantly stepped up its operational footprint, the number of law enforcement assets it has in and around potential targets. So Homeland Security officials are preparing for this, but still quite concerned about the threat environment. And finally, John, the risk of Iranian-backed cyber attacks is very concerning. They have sophisticated cyber capabilities and have used them before against critical infrastructure. Think energy and water grids, transportation infrastructure, and more. So cybersecurity officials, members of the private sector, members of the public should all remain vigilant, monitor for threats, and stay in close touch with federal, state, and local law enforcement.
Sam Vinograd, thank you so much. A little bit of reporting here in Bahrain says it has shut down the airspace temporarily. This is amid fears of retaliation by Iran against retaliation in response to the U.S. attacks.
That's the question.
Go now to Charlie D'Agata, who is at the Pentagon. Charlie, there's a report out of the United Arab Emirates that Iran says that the missile barrage on Qatar was the same number of bombs used by the U.S. on the nuclear sites. How do they read that over there? What's your sense of what that might mean?
Well, certainly the Qataris aren't counting that number. You know, Margaret had reported 6. We're hearing as many as 10, but nowhere near the amount of munitions that were dropped on those nuclear sites in Iran. And it's part of Iran's messaging here. And again, we've discussed it before. This is symbolic. Going after Al-Udeid, the biggest...
Can we get 1,000 on that like, guys? Continue to double tap that screen or click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up. We got 1,400 people in the building. Can we at least get 1,000 on that like by clicking those 3 dots, hitting that thumbs up, man, and most definitely subscribing to the channel if you're new. Shout out to everybody, man. I can't believe this is going on in 2025. I know y'all can't either. Man, I just hope it don't turn into WW3. This is crazy.
the headquarters of CENTCOM in the Middle East. It's symbolic, saying we're going to get you where you are. Also, one of the best defended, knowing full well that if any base was going to be able to defend against a missile attack, a short-range missile attack like that, it would be capable of doing that. And as we've discussed before, all of these bases throughout the Middle East have already been, on high alert and reinforced with beefed up surveillance. This is ahead of the attacks in Iran. And you mentioned Bahrain. The reason Bahrain has closed down its airspace, well, that is another huge base. That's the Fifth Fleet. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is based there. Kuwait has also rang the alarm in its areas. Again, these are all areas where there are U.S. bases. So not necessarily saying that they are next or that there's anything to indicate that they might be coming out under attack, but they're looking at what's happening at the audacity of attack at a place like Al Udeid and saying, well, we've got U.S. troops here, we've got U.S. troops in Bahrain with the Fifth Fleet, and then again, we really have to keep an eye on the more vulnerable troops, as Holly mentioned earlier, the ones who had already come under attack previously, places like Al-Assad, which is much more vulnerable to attack because they simply do not have the kind of air defenses that you might see at a place like Al Udeid and in Bahrain with the Fifth Fleet. Right. So I think we have to look at the nature of this attack, whether this is the beginning. The Qataris are saying that all of them.
I got something intelligent for you, Andrew. You just got deported. We'll holler at you, dog. You know what I'm saying? There is no disrespect on the channel's broadcaster tolerated on this channel. We'll holler at you, dog. How intelligent is that? You just got deported.
Missiles were intercepted without anybody getting injured. We're still waiting to hear from CENTCOM to see their reaction to it. But remember,
shout out to Judy for that $2. Thank you.
They're worried about every single base in that region. So they're going to have their hands full, and I understand why they're probably a little bit busy at the moment.
Charlie Daggett, what we were seeing there before the map was the activation of the air defenses in Qatar. Let's go back to Margaret Brennan, who has some new reporting for us on the phone. Margaret?
Hi, John. We know that the other allies who have significant U.S. military presence on their shores, Kuwait, for example, which has the fourth largest U.S. military installation in the world, is bracing. There was an expectation that this firing at Qatar would happen, and that along with it there could be follow-on attacks. And so that is why
they may follow up, guys. They may follow up.
Closing their airspace earlier today. We know that there are further conversations being had as well amongst other U.S. intel agencies, Homeland Security officials, as well as the State Department and DoD CENTCOM about planning for this. So we do know that the Omanis, the Qataris, the Bahrainis, all of those countries that have been allies to both are bracing. What is interesting in terms of the firing at the U.S. base rather than at the city of Doha, for example, in Qatar, is that it's hitting at the United States directly. So far, these intercepted missiles did not appear to be aimed at domestic targets within Qatar. That would truly change the dynamic in the region. Qatar trades with Iran.
Honey says
Iran
it has already begun.
Isolated in this region. It actually has started to rebuild some of its ties with some of these Arab states that they had tension with over years past. And so this is reintroducing some tension, though. But there's tension on the American side as well, with these allies saying, we didn't have a warning well in advance that the United States was going to go ahead with this attack. The U.S. did notify 20 or 30 countries, a small number of them, though, when the planes were in the air. Those were who are in most direct risk. Saudi Arabia, for example, did have advance notice.
Guys, let me know.
Some of the other regional allies did not.
And Margaret, very quickly, if the White House was expecting this, if this was the expected response, does that, going back to the idea of calibration, does that mean then that the next thing we should, how should that inform how we understand the next things we might hear from the Secretary of State or maybe even from the President himself?
I'm nervous too, Southern Gale. This is crazy.
And if they receive it as a calibrated attack rather than a full-throated, all-out response.
Well, John, we know that in the planning for the attacks the U.S. carried out on Fordow, on Isfahan, and Natanz, it was not just the strikes that CENTCOM was planning for, it was also the blowback and preparing the theater. So there were protective measures put in place. So this had to have been gamed out with President Trump, right? He had to have been thinking about this as well. But that question is whether he goes up the escalation ladder or lets this go. And that is the difference between this being what was described yesterday in public by the Secretary of Defense as targeted and limited and specific to the nuclear program, or whether this becomes a more, a broader conflict. We know the President and the Secretary of State have indicated the U.S. has already identified other targets inside Iran it could hit. Didn't define that. Are those
now,
further
Russia
nuclear sites, or are
says that
they
they
now
might
going to
get
go
involved,
up their
guys. Oh my
escalation
goodness!
ladder? So we know we've been looking
Continue
at
to double
two
tap
options.
that screen. We
It's
almost
gonna be
to
what he
1,000
chooses.
on that like,
Margaret
man.
Brennan, thank you
Click
very
those
much. I
three
want to go back
dots,
to
hit
Chief
that
White House
thumbs
correspondent
up.
Nancy Cordes, who has some new information. Nancy?
John, here's what we've heard from White House officials so far as they continue to watch what is unfolding in Qatar. We're told by a White House official that White House and DoD officials are aware of and closely monitoring threats to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Remember that top national security officials, Pentagon officials were already gathered at the White House for a...
They're saying that there could be more retaliatory attacks on other bases in Qatar, Kuwait, whatever you want to call it. There are most definitely could be more attacks, guys. Ooh, pray for us all, man. I hope nobody gets hurt, man. This is crazy. Continue to double tap that screen, though, guys. We're almost to 1,000 on that like. It would be greatly appreciated. Shout out to everybody in the building.
Scheduled meeting with the president. While there, they can take advantage of the Situation Room to monitor events as they unfold in Qatar. We have received more expansive reaction from the nation of Qatar itself, however. A short time ago, a spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry strongly condemning this attack by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, saying, quote, "We consider this a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar." All of this putting the Gulf states and U.S. allies in the region in a very difficult position, John. On one hand, they don't want to get dragged into a wider conflict. On the other hand, they have had grave concerns about Iranian aggression and Iran's attempts to build a nuclear weapon for years, if not decades. And they shared those concerns with President Trump when he was in the region last month in Qatar, in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. As one top official in one of those Gulf states described it to me, they worry greatly about the possibility of a nuclear accident in Iran causing grave harm to their citizens. They said, look, if there was a nuclear accident in New York, you are going to feel the effects in New Jersey, and that's how they feel about it. I hope it don't get worse either. So a very difficult set of circumstances for Gulf states, who the president views as very close allies right now in the wake of these attacks.
Nancy Cordes with reporting from the White House. Thank you very much, Nancy. I want to bring back in retired Air Force Lieutenant General Mark Wetherington. General, give me a sense of, there are planes in the air, U.S. planes in the air. Give us a sense of what you imagine is going on in terms of a response or a possible response. Margaret Brennan talked about that ladder of escalation. Do you have an idea of what that ladder could range from?
Well, I think, John, the first thought that comes to my mind is that 6 to 10 short-range ballistic missiles is not insignificant, but it's not the kind of coordinated multi-axis attack that's going to saturate our air defenses. I think it's whether it's symbolic or whether it's a reflection of the capacity that the Iranian military has after Israel's actions over the last week. We will learn that over time, but I think right now we'll sit and watch. We certainly have all the intelligence assets we can. We have all the force protection assets that we need if there were a different type of response from Iran. And I think we'll watch that situation develop.
What questions are going through your mind as somebody who's been in?
Now, y'all keep on saying that they can't touch the Gulf. But we most definitely witnessed yesterday, as we was watching another broadcast, that they most definitely, Israel said that they have the capabilities to basically reach us. You know, I don't know how true that is, but that's what Israel said. And the one thing that I always was taught is don't ever underestimate your enemy. I'm just saying. So y'all can feel however you feel, but don't underestimate these people. We don't know exactly what they got. You know, we don't know exactly what they got. So don't just count them out so fast. I hope they can't. I hope they don't. But we don't know exactly what they have. And according to Israel, they most definitely can get to us.
Jobs you have been, in terms of what would you want to know right now if you had access to the intelligence, or what do you think is the most important thing to think about over the next, say, 24 hours?
Well, there's a lot of questions. This could go a lot of ways, John. I think first and foremost, let's stick with the force protection problem, right? It's understanding the capacity that the Iranians have, understanding what they might be moving or positioning to take advantage of vulnerabilities that we have. I think we want to understand how well they can see and understand the battle space. And certainly our forces are taking actions, whether that's moving so that they're not always sitting stationary at an expected location that can be targeted. Right, we're going to take those appropriate actions to ensure American men and women and our allies are safe.
And linger on that last point again. What kinds of things, I mean, at the base right now, what do you expect is happening in terms of personnel?
What's up,
certainly, they're strengthening their defenses. They're alerting people to be ready for an attack. They've got their equipment and personal protective gear with them. They understand where they're going to be able to shelter and those types of things. Air defense units on the installations are at a higher level.
I also hear y'all saying that their missiles were shot down. Okay, I understand that, but it's not the principality of the missiles being shot down. It's the whole thing is that they even tried. That they even tried to attack that military base. That's the main focal point, is that they even attempted. That's what could make us retaliate against them, because they even attempted to try to play with us. You see what I'm saying? So, like I said, man, y'all are downplaying the situation, but it could be far greater than what y'all think. Continue to double tap that screen, guys. We are 50 likes away from 1K, guys. If it's 50 people in the building that have not hit that like button, please click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up, and most definitely subscribe to the channel if you're new.
Level of readiness and alert to respond if there is another missile attack of any type. And I think those significant assets, very vulnerable assets that we might have, we're looking to make sure, can we move them somewhere else, either out of harm's way or keep them moving so that they can't be targeted in a more static way.
One other thing I want to ask you about is something you mentioned is it the case, or do you imagine it's the case, that U.S. intelligence is trying to figure out not just what Iran will do, but what it can do now that it's been significantly damaged by the Israeli attacks and now by the U.S. action?
Absolutely. And I think your second question is the more important one, right? We want to understand that.
Shout out to you, Alfredo.
What is the range of options that they have? It's not about necessarily picking, this is exactly what we think they can do. It's about understanding what's that range of possibilities and preparing for that range.
Right. All right. Let's go back now to Holly Williams, who is in Erbil, Iraq. Holly, just staying on that question of what Iran actually can do. Iran has been significantly weakened over the last 2 weeks as a result of these attacks. Now we find out what
they feel like they can do.
That's right, John. You know, Margaret was just talking then about the US
guys.
Expecting and planning for blowback. I think a lot of people here in the Middle East over the last day and a half have been sort of gaming out, asking themselves, what exactly is a weakened Iran capable of? What kind of retaliation can it carry out? Because make no mistake, Iran has been significantly weakened by more than 10 days of war with Israel. We have seen video after video coming from the Israeli military of strikes on missile launch sites, on Iranian drones. Now, it's really difficult to quantify, but I think we can assume that Iran's military is significantly less capable than it was 10 days ago. Not only that, also think about Iran's proxies here in the Middle East, the so-called axis of resistance. They have also been significantly weakened over the last 18 months or so. Hamas has been pummeled in Gaza. Hezbollah's leadership has been decimated by Israel in Lebanon. Here in Iraq, the Iran-backed militia groups responsible for the deaths of hundreds of US troops over the years have also been significantly weakened. And then the Houthis in Yemen have also been targeted with airstrikes. So we've been asking ourselves, what is a weakened Iran capable of? I guess today we have a little bit more clarity on that.
Important point, Holly, that it's not just the missiles they can fire, but also what they can activate or not activate in those proxy forces that they have throughout the Middle East. Holly Williams, thank you. Let's bring in Senior National Security Correspondent Charlie D'Agata from the Pentagon. Charlie, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, again, first of all, just an update. We believe that whatever missile attack was pointed towards the Qataris and the Al Udeid is over. We're trying to get a count on how many, between 6 and 10. There are varying reports that there was an attack on the Al-Assad base in Iraq. The Iraqis themselves are denying that report that it happened. And I want to point out, so there are air raid sirens going on all across that Central Command region, in places like Kuwait, in places like Bahrain. Again, like Al Udeid, huge bases, well reinforced. In the case of Bahrain, you've got the Navy's 5th Fleet that's based there. It will be very heavily defended. But we have to talk about the more vulnerable areas, which is why everybody's paying attention to the Al-Assad base, which Holly pointed out earlier. Back in 2020, it came under a sustained attack. TBIs, a lot of traumatic brain injuries, but it was a serious attack, and one that Iran has and its proxies have attacked again and again because of its vulnerability. There are about 2,500 forces there. Close to where Holly is another base there at Erbil in northern Iraq. Again, more vulnerable because it's smaller. It just doesn't have the kind of, Patriot weapon system, air defense systems, and the kind of systems that you'd see, aside from the fact that the Qataris themselves will have their own air defense systems in place. So when you're talking about the vulnerability of U.S. forces, the smaller the base, the forward operating base, the more vulnerable they are to attack because they don't have the kind of weaponry and machinery to take those incoming missiles down. We also want to point out there are about 700 to 900 special forces
Harlem, you know what
in Syria. And when we talk about the vulnerability of these forces, because of their small footprint, they're also surrounded by bad neighbors. So they are within reach of Iran itself and Iranian missiles, but also within reach of any number, and I say that, any number of anti-American, possibly pro-Iranian regimes, either backed by Iran or just anti-American. And they are rife throughout parts of Iraq, especially around al-Assad, and also in Syria itself. So the big concern, certainly from CENTCOM, is if we see a sophisticated, coordinated attack on multiple bases, say you go after Al Udeid, you go after Bahrain, you go after Kuwait, and then you go after these smaller bases like al-Assad, because the United States has beefed up its posture there. There's plenty of military options in the CENTCOM region, but if you overwhelm these bases all at once, and that's why all these alarms are going off all over the Middle East, that causes concern.
Right. That would be the full ladder of escalation. At the moment, it appears that we're on the lower rungs of that ladder, at least based on this preliminary reporting. The U.S. official confirms that the short and medium-range missiles that targeted Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar.
So if you're wondering what happened, man, whether you pronounce it Qatar, Quata, or Qatar, Iran retaliated against America by attacking one of our U.S. bases that's in Qatar or in Quator or Qatar, whatever you call it. And they're saying that they could possibly be targeting other areas. But the most important thing is, even though there were no casualties and the missiles were intercepted, the whole point is that they tried us in the first place. Remember, Trump said that any kind of retaliatory act, would invoke a response from the United States. And all I'm saying is, this is most definitely a retaliatory act. Will we retaliate, guys? Continue to double tap that screen, click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new.
have produced no casualties that have been reported at this time. Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon, thank you. We want to bring back in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Sam, your thoughts?
My thoughts are that right now the intelligence community is working overtime really to try to assess two things. One is, of course, the state of Iran's nuclear program, but second is the intentions of the supreme leader of Iran. We're all, of course, very focused on whether the U.S. government and the Israeli government know where he is. But separate and apart from his location, what's going through his mind right now is likely what the intelligence community is focused on. They are trying to assess whether the supreme leader is intent on getting into a prolonged conflict with not just Israel, but with the United States, or if, having suffered maximum pressure from the United States, from Israel, and from international sanctions, these latest military strikes over the past couple of weeks will in fact push him back to the negotiating table. I know, John, that there's a war of words right now, a lot of inflammatory rhetoric being thrown around, but having worked on the early days of the Obama-era nuclear deal, it is possible that there are private channels that are open between the U.S. government and Iran and the supreme leader to try to find an off-ramp and to bring folks to the negotiating table. So again, the intelligence community's assessment of the supreme leader's intentions here, not just the nuclear program, not just his location, but the supreme leader's intentions should be a critical part of any national security decision-making process that exists in this White House and that tees up a decision for the President of the United States.
Sam, I think that that makes good sense, and you know, one of the things that we're trying to assess, because it will set the conditions for the U.S. response, is this idea of calibration. At the moment, there is no reporting that there are any strikes outside.
Shout out to Nurse P for that 10. She says, Mahel, remember those people that were on U.S. soil and they couldn't find them. They're going to hit us here. They're going to hit us. They're going to hit us here. Just watch and stay woke, everybody. They most definitely may try, Nurse P. You exactly right, man. That's crazy, y'all. I hope not, but it is most definitely a possibility.
Of the Al Udeid base in Qatar, and that would, again, seem to be a calibrated, predictable response. The air defense systems appear to be working, and there have been no reports of casualties. So if this is a response that had to be taken, but that was very limited so as not to lead to more escalation, it would seem that it would be hard to imagine designing it, you know, for anything other than to maybe de-escalate and return to the negotiating table. What do you think about my what is admittedly speculation there?
Well,
I'd love to hear y'all keep on trying to correct the name of this place. Qatar, Qatar. They saying Qatar on the news. I ain't seen not one of y'all go tell them nothing, but y'all over here laughing, talking about it's not pronounced like that. It's not pronounced like that. Well, I'm going to just start saying Qatar, because that's what they saying on the news. Now go to Fox and NBC and ESPN and all the rest of them channels that's reporting on this and saying Qatar, and go tell them the same thing y'all keep on telling me about the name of this place over there in the, over there where it's at. Go tell them. You know what I'm saying? Quit correcting the name of Qatar, Qatar, you know, Quatar, you know, Quaker State, whatever it is, it's the same thing. You know what I'm saying. I'm just saying, though.
Focus instead on the fact that we really just don't know at this point whether this was an isolated incident. If it is, then this was certainly a calibrated response, and I agree with your analysis. We just don't know. It is too soon to tell. We are receiving some reports that White House officials do believe that additional attacks on U.S. bases are coming. What we don't know is if they'll attack well-defended bases or if they'll concurrently activate proxies and launch cyber attacks. What we do know is where they have activated folks in the past, again, military installations, government officials, Jewish religious sites, Israeli diplomatic facilities, and more. So while we try to speculate on whether this is calibrated, the key factors here are whether this was an isolated incident, and if it was not, whether
now let's deport him. Yeah, good job. Don't best put him in timeout. Deport him, because I just told him to quit correcting me on how to say it. Go correct the news. They saying Qatar. Why y'all ain't saying nothing to them? Why y'all over here playing with me? I don't care how to pronounce it. I'm from the USA. I know how to pronounce that. United States of America. Yeah, how about that? You know, I don't care if it's quarantine, Quaker State. You know what I'm saying? None of that. I don't care. It is what it is. The news is saying Qatar. Go correct them.
Adequate security precautions have been taken at potential target sites to prepare for security incidents. I do know that here in the Homeland, there's been extensive planning, and as Margaret so aptly noted, prior to President Trump authorizing the military strikes over the weekend, there was significant planning about scenarios that could unfold if Iran chose to retaliate overseas. I think the biggest vulnerability here is for American citizens traveling overseas in locations where we just don't have a lot of assets, where proxies could be activated. That's one risk that will continue to follow, John.
Okay, Sam Vinograd, thank you very much. Let's go back to Senior National Security Correspondent Charlie D'Agata from the Pentagon. Just to reset for our viewers who are joining us, we have been reporting on Iranian missile attacks on the U.S. airbase or the U.S. base, I should say, in Qatar, the Al-Udeid.
Yeah, in Qatar. You hear them? They ain't saying Quaker State. They ain't saying none of that. They said in Qatar. So go over there and fuss at them about how they pronouncing it. Y'all heard it? They said Qatar. Listen.
Airbase or the U.S. base, I should say, in Qatar, on the U.S. airbase or the U.S. base, I should say, in Qatar, acts on the U.S. airbase or the U.S. base, I should say, in Qatar, acts on the U.S. airbase or the U.S. base, I should say, in Qatar.
Qatar is what they saying. Now go over there and fuss at them. You know what I'm saying? Go type in a chat about how to pronounce it right. You know what I'm saying? I'll call them Quaker State if I want to. I'm just saying quarantine, you know what I'm saying? All those good Q words, you know, whatever. They saying Qatar on the news and y'all ain't say nothing. But y'all come over here typing in my chat talking about it's pronounced Quadar. It's pronounced, you know, however. They saying Qatar on the news. Go fuss at them.
The Al-Udeid base in Qatar at the moment, that is the only place we have reports of action. No casualties reported, and apparently the missile defense systems have intercepted whatever missiles were sent there. Charlie, let's go to you. Your thoughts.
Well, first of all, we have a U.S. official confirms, this is in the CENTCOM region, confirms Iranian short and medium range missiles targeted the Al-Udeid airbase. No casualties reported at this time. This is obviously after the Qataris themselves had said that they had come under attack. That happened about 50 minutes ago when we first heard word about it. Just to give you, again, a broad picture there. Al-Udeid is the largest base. It's where Central Command is based. It's the headquarters there. There are 9,000 U.S. forces. In addition to that base, the biggest base in the Middle East for U.S. forces, Bahrain is the home of the Fifth Fleet. That has had sirens going off and shelter-in-place warnings for the residents there, although there haven't been any incoming. Kuwait is also on high alert, another big base there. There were reports that the Al-Assad base in Iraq had come under attack, but both the Iraqis and others have said those reports are erroneous. But everybody is on high alert throughout that whole Central Command area because of what they're seeing here, not necessarily because there is a threat that's headed in their direction.
Sure, only prudent. Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon, thank you. Joining us by phone is Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. Margaret, the latest you've been hearing, and also just as you've been evaluating this strike and what your reporting tells you about how we should think about the diplomatic conditions here and how they've changed, is there an opportunity here for the diplomacy to rush in? And if so, what is that opportunity?
Well, John, I've been trying to get hold of U.S. officials to better understand, the thinking in the White House right now. The message has been ready for diplomacy at any time. I was told by Secretary Rubio just yesterday that Steve Witkoff, the president's personal envoy, is on a 12-hour standby to get on a plane to meet with Iranian officials at any time should they say it's a go. We don't have any sign that it is a go at this moment in time. But what we are seeing play out is very much within the realm of anticipated risk, anticipated threat. And in fact, when this kind of intelligence is picked up, either through satellite, through signals intelligence, whatever the source of it is, the U.S. government prepares internally. Legally, they're also required to notify the public that there is risk. The first notice we got of this, we saw via the State Department telling people in Qatar to shelter in place if you're American. A few hours earlier, they issued a warning worldwide to Americans everywhere that there is an increased level of risk to Americans. That they are legally compelled to do when they are telling their own U.S. officials to prepare for something. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to do with specific threat intelligence, but that because of what the United States did, enter this war that Israel has been waging against Iran and Iran hitting it back, the United States is now a player, not just because we are the biggest provider of arms and weaponry and defenses to Israel, but because now it is our planes that have gone in there and done such a high-profile attack against the crown jewels of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the clerics that run that country, who have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in this program that they claimed was not a weapon, despite credible evidence suggesting otherwise, that they went beyond the civilian intention of it that they said that it was for. They have now been decimated, and that the airspace over Iran, they don't own. They are in a place where anyone gaming this out said Iran has to do something, they can't do nothing. Now, does this get it out of the way and clear the deck for the diplomatic opportunity you're talking about? We have to wait and see, but certainly we don't know what that means at this point. Secretary Rubio just yesterday kept emphasizing again and again they want to talk this out and come to a settlement with Iran, but at the same time talked about how horrifically, how horrific the regime running the country is. So offering a lifeline for that regime to stay in power.
All right, that's enough of that. All right, so they gave us an update on what's going on over there. Israel has came out and spoken about this ongoing conflict with Iran for the first time, and basically spoke about what Trump did as well.
The National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Prime Minister's office. It's Monday, June 23rd, day 11 of Operation Rising Lion against Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program, and day 626 since the October 7th atrocities. I've got a couple of brief points to share with you, and then I will take your questions, which unusually for today you have pre-submitted. Let me start today with an update on Operation Rising Lion. Israel's campaign against Iran's war machine continues with full force.
This is an Israeli official,
the IDF is operating freely in Iranian airspace. We're striking with precision and with power. In the latest Israeli Air Force sorties, 6 Iranian air bases were hit. 15 fighter jets and helicopters were destroyed. The ability to launch from those airfields has been crippled. Just this morning, more than 15 Israeli jets struck missile launch and storage sites in the Kermanshah region, destroying surface-to-surface missiles which were aimed at Israeli civilians. I must reiterate to you that these were not, and these are not, a theoretical threat. These were missiles which were locked on Israeli cities, and they've now been eliminated. Israel is systematically eliminating the leadership of Iran's terror empire. In the past 72 hours, we've eliminated the commander of the Palestine Corps in the IRGC Quds Force. That's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, the main liaison to Hamas, the terrorist organization, and who was one of the architects of the October 7th massacre. We've taken out the head of the Quds Force weapons transfer unit, and also a senior IRGC commander in the UAE division. His name was Izadi. Now, he wasn't just a general, he was a terror strategist. He coordinated directly with Hamas in Gaza,
Iran, guys.
terrorists in Judea and Samaria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. His mission, the annihilation of the State of Israel. That mission has died with him. In addition, I can share with you that earlier today, the IDF struck to obstruct access routes to the Fordow enrichment site. Now, the contrast could not be clearer. Iran fires at civilian centers. Israel, in contrast, strikes with purpose. We are conducting targeted strikes against military assets and terror commanders. The Iranian regime continues its indiscriminate missile fire at our civilians. Just last night, and again this morning, missile alerts were sounded across this country as Iran attempted to rain terror on our innocent people. The Israel Defense Forces and the security establishment have all relevant agencies are fully prepared, both defensively and offensively.
It says Israel's government update after strikes on Iran. He most definitely is an Israel leader or whatever. He's telling us basically what they have done.
For any scenario. Next, I want to share with you our latest figures. Since the beginning of this operation, the Iranian terror regime has fired around 500 missiles and over 1,000 UAVs at Israel's towns and villages and population centers. 24 people have been murdered here in Israel.
This is for educational purposes only.
1,361 have been wounded, 14 seriously. 15,000 people, that is 15,000 people, have been evacuated from their homes that were damaged by Iranian ballistic missile fire. Next to our hostages, as has been reported, the IDF has bravely recovered 3 hostages whose bodies were brought home. The 3 are Ofra Kedar, who was 71 years old. She was murdered at Kibbutz Be'eri.
This is for educational purposes.
She was just out for a walk on that Saturday morning when the terrorists killed her. Yonatan Samarano, who was 21 years old. He was murdered in Be'eri after fleeing from the Nova party. You'll remember that it was Yonatan Samarano whose body was abducted by an UNRWA official, a United Nations employee, an UNRWA official who took his body as a hostage. And Staff Sergeant Shai Levinson, who was 19 years old, a tank commander who fell in battle, and as he fell, he saved the lives of many, many people.
One of my moderators give me a copyright disclaimer.
This rescue operation was made possible thanks to precise intelligence information. The families were informed upon the completion of the identification process. Since the October 7th terrorist attack, 205 people have been returned or were retrieved from the Gaza Strip. 148 alive, thankfully, thank God. 57 deceased. But still, 50 hostages, living and the deceased, who were brutally abducted by the Hamas terrorist organization, are still being held captive for 626 days now. They do not leave our minds for a single moment. The Prime Minister has made clear that the efforts to return them are ongoing, and the battlefield and via negotiations in coordinations with the United States and other mediating countries are ongoing. Next, as it's a while since we had one of these briefings, let me reiterate, as shared just yesterday by the Prime Minister, our goals in this war. They are, of course, to end Iran's nuclear threat. We launched this operation to eliminate the regime's nuclear capability, not to delay it, but to dismantle it. Now, that also includes the complete destruction of Iran's enrichment, weaponization, and delivery infrastructure. To take out Iran's missile arsenal, we're targeting not only the bomb, their capacity to create a nuclear bomb, which they were extremely close to achieving, but the 20,000 missiles they plan to rain down on us. We don't know if they really stopped them, though. To eliminate Iran's ballistic missile production and deployment capabilities, to neutralize the axis of evil, we have shattered Iran's terror axis. From Lebanon to Syria to Gaza, we have collapsed Iran's regional terror network. Iran is often called the head of the snake or the head of the octopus. That means that Hezbollah greatly diminished. Assad in Syria, because of our actions against Hezbollah, he fled. Hamas have been greatly diminished. On Hamas, in particular, in Gaza, Israel's mission, again, is not containment. Hamas cannot rule Gaza. We will not defeat Hamas in Gaza, only for them to once again reform, rearm, and attack us again, as they have been doing over almost every 18 months or 2 years. We are destroying Hamas's military, political, and terror infrastructure inside Gaza, and all the while, we will bring home every single hostage. We will not stop until we bring home every single one, the living and those who have already been killed by Hamas.
This is for educational purposes only, guys.
You should be aware that Israel is most definitely deepening the US-Israeli alliance. I don't think there's anyone but Prime Minister Netanyahu, as confirmed by President Trump, who have a closer relationship between the president and the prime minister. Never has there been such coordination between a US president and an Israeli prime minister. And that means that we have cemented the unprecedented military and intelligence cooperation with our US partners. And all the while, we always are mindful that defeating the Iranian effort to create a nuclear weapon and their ballistic missile program, and Iran in particular, means that the gates of peace will open. President Trump has talked about, and the Prime Minister has reiterated, that first comes strength and then comes peace. Our objectives that the Abraham Accords will grow. The Prime Minister reiterated this last night. Our objective to expand peace deals across the Arab world, leveraging Iran's collapse. We wish to protect future generations in this country, not only for our children, but for our children's children and for the eternity of this country to live in safety and security in this region. We've made very clear when it comes to Iran, our objective is not regime change, but that may be the byproduct, as happened in Syria, whereby Iran's people, who are not our enemies, who are victims of this Iranian regime, we believe that there is an opportunity now for them to throw off the fear which has been hoisted upon them by the Iranian regime, because we believe that Iran's regime are more scared of their own people than they are even of Israel. Ultimately, we wish to secure Israel's long-term security, our sovereignty, and we're doing this with moral clarity.
We are 25 lights
and this
away
war
from
against
1.1K.
the Iranians, the Iranian regime, it won't stop too soon, and it won't go on too long, as the Prime Minister said. We will finish the job. We are fighting with precision to stop. We'll only stop when the goals are fully achieved. Okay, I will now take your questions, which have been pre-submitted. First question here is from Alexander Cornwell from Reuters, and your question, you've got a few questions here. Has the country's political leadership assessed that the military is close to achieving its military objectives in Tehran? Thank you for that question from Reuters. As the Prime Minister made clear, Alexander, yesterday in his press conference, and also the President Trump has made clear, we have together made unprecedented steps to the objective of ensuring that Iran can no longer have the ability to create a nuclear weapon. we have made unprecedented steps in partnership between our two countries. And Defense Secretary in the US, Pete Hegseth, has made the same point.
Sincere,
and that is why we believe that we are
making
very strong strides towards our objectives in Tehran. But this war will end when our objectives, those two main key objectives, are met. That ballistic missile program that reaches us here in Israel, but has the capacity to reach much further afield, much further afield, and also that nuclear weapons program. There is no scenario where Iran can have a nuclear weapon. Next question, also from Reuters, is today we've seen military hits sites that are associated with the internal security.
I got a question for you, Mr. Representative. Why did y'all drag America into this? We don't want no parts. Y'all handle that. What is going on, guys? Wow, this is one of Israel's leaders basically speaking on the situation going on with Iran and the USA. Man, this is crazy, man. Wow, 2025, man, the year reveal. 14 more likes, guys. We'll be at 1.1K. Continue to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Click those 3 dots, hit that thumbs up.
With the ballistic missile or nuclear program, why is this? Thank you for that question. We've made our war objectives very, very clear. They are the destruction of Iran's nuclear weapons program, and their enrichment capabilities. There is no need whatsoever for a country like Iran to enrich uranium to 60% or higher. Absolutely no reason whatsoever. And we are taking apart this threat. And we made huge strides over the last couple of nights. And we will continue until the job is done, and together with their ballistic missile program. And your next question is Israel ready to pause its military operation for a diplomatic process to play out? The US have taken the lead on that particular question. The US had made very, very clear that there is a willingness for Iran to return to discussions. That is always Israel's default scenario. Iran were given 60 days, more than 60 days, to come to an arrangement. They strung the world along. They obfuscated the talks. They stretched out the talks, but no more. Israel and our US partners are united on this fact that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And most right-thinking countries, most decent right-thinking people around the world agree with that fact. And the final question here is the Prime Minister addressed. Okay. Next question is from Catherine Norris Trent from France 24, France 24. What do the strike on Evin prison and the Basij in Iran signify? Is this a widening of the operational scope towards regime change? Thank you for that question. Our objective is not regime change in Iran. That's up to the Iranian people. But we do, as a byproduct of our weakening this regime, the 80% of Iran's people that we believe oppose this regime, that are not allowed to have a voice, whose women are killed in the streets for showing a strand of their hair, whose civil liberties are impinged, whose people are beaten and imprisoned and disappeared. The 80% of Iran's people, if that is a byproduct of this effort to challenge the Iranian regime, then Israel is certainly behind that idea, although regime change is not our objective. Your next question from France 24, France 24 is, did Israel strike Iranian missile launchers to pave the Operation Midnight Hammer at the request of the US 48 hours ahead? Thank you for this question, Catherine. We get this question a fair amount. I just want to reiterate to the audience out there, to people watching, to journalists, there is no closer relationship between the US President, Donald J. Trump, and our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. There is no closer relationship. They have known each other for many, many years. Our actions are completely coordinated because we have the same objectives. And this was a question I received on the night when the US struck with such precision the Iranian nuclear enrichment sites, whether this was done in, whether Israel knew about these operations. The president has made crystal clear that our prime minister and the president are working extremely closely together. I cannot reiterate that enough.
So that president
our prime
is
minister
working with Trump, guys.
And President Trump are working extremely closely together. Okay, I think one more question here from Akiva Van Konigsveld from JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, and you're seeking comment on the claim by Minister Eliyahu that Israel is cooperating with the Iranian opposition. Okay, well, as I've made clear already, Akiva, as the Prime Minister has said yesterday, it is not the government's objective for regime change. But that said, if a byproduct of our efforts to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, to destroy their enrichment capabilities, there is no need for an enrichment capability, zero need except for a nuclear weapon. And also their ballistic missile program. Their launches in particular, which are so important. Those are our objectives. If a byproduct is the Iranian people shaking off the shackles of this oppressive regime that has oppressed the Iranian people for the past 46 or 47 years, and that would be a welcome objective, although it is not a war aim for the state of Israel.
All right, so that was an Israeli leader speaking on what basically took place today. Took place with them as far as working with Trump. And y'all, Trump has responded to what happened today from Iran. Let's see what Trump had to say about all this. Continue to double tap that screen, get the likes up. Let's see what Trump had to say about the attacks today on that U.S. military base, guys. Hold on. Trump has responded, guys.
Joining us, it is a new hour here on Live Now from Fox, just past 4 p.m. Eastern. We are 1 p.m. out on the West Coast as we continue to update you on the big story of the day as the Middle East tensions continue to grow. This is the latest from Qatar earlier today with Iran taking a strike or trying to at least to the one U.S. airbase out in Qatar. So we want to continue to bring you the very latest here on Live Now from Fox. Again, bring you these updates here in real time. And we also want to get some analysis as well, talking to experts in related fields about what is next here in the Middle East. And that is why I want to bring in our next guest to help break it all down for us this hour. Please welcome Ed Hussein, a senior fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for being here with us, Ed. And first off, if I could just get your reaction to what we saw earlier today in Qatar.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. I appreciate it. I think Qatar is an illustration of the fact that there is a large American base in Al Udeid, and the Iranians feel the need to strike back for face-saving reasons, that they want to be seen to be in a position of having responded to the American-led attack on their nuclear enrichment facilities. So this is two things. One, a face-saving measure for the Iranians, and two, an attempt to say to America and its allies, even in the Gulf region, that the Iranians will not sit back, the Iranian government will not sit back and watch this.
And when we think about the next moves here, I mean, is Iran then hoping, okay, we tried to make a statement here, we hope now that President Trump and the U.S. Do not respond back? Or, I mean, is this something, because it would seem if you didn't have President Trump there, maybe this would all end. But having President Trump now as the president once again, it seems like it could ramp up even more. I mean, what's your feelings?
My honest assessment is that, and this is based on President Trump's previous comments, that when Qasem Soleimani was killed during President Trump's first era in office,
and
the
they
Iranians
called
the White House and said, we will conduct an operation near an American naval base. Please don't respond, and please ensure that no one is on the move. We just need to do something to show to our people that, look, we can attack an American base. And lo and behold, President Trump understood the messaging, the thinking, the instinct, the theater behind it, and nobody was killed. Similarly, here in Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base is almost a city in its own right. Nobody was killed. I suspect the Americans, especially the White House, were informed of this movement. And if there is no further escalation, this may well be the end of the matter for now. But my fear isn't so much what President Trump will or will not do. I think he's wise enough, considerate enough to understand that this was a requisite move, and America, by all measures, has done what it wanted to do, again with no loss of American lives, destroying the American nuclear program. My concern is this: is there an internal attempt inside Iran to remove the supreme leader? Does the supreme leader die for other reasons? Are there other intelligence operations led by the Israelis and others that we don't know about inside Iran? Does something happen inside Iran that causes a scenario that forces escalation? But this recent attempt on its own, I don't foresee resulting in any greater escalation.
And Ed, what was your thoughts when we heard, before this weekend, it was the White House position that they did not seek a regime change in Iran, but that all changed by Truth Social post by President Trump just yesterday. What did you make of that?
I think, Mike, that it was right for President Trump and the American administration in general not to seek regime change in Iran. Given the mistakes of regime change and the disastrous consequences in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in other parts of the Middle East.
This is crazy, guys.
I don't think President Trump, or for that matter, the MAGA movement, is about regime change in foreign countries. It's up to those individuals and their countries to decide their future. I also think it's dangerous for Iran to have a regime change that's imposed by either America or Israel, for the simple reason that the Iranian composition is Persian, is Arabic, is Baluchi, is Azeri, and you open up an ethnic tinderbox, and it's not in American interest, or I'd argue even in Israeli interest, to want to get involved in a country that is so complicated, so ancient, and so on the border of so many of our allies and so many military and naval bases, that it makes very little sense. It's in our interests and in the Israeli interests to minimize chaos in Iran and to ensure that the Iranian mullahs, the fanatical Islamists, don't have a nuclear weapon. We've ensured that. So I think from our perspective, from a Western and an Israeli perspective, mission accomplished. Let's just scale back. Let them have a few pops at a few military bases. As long as there's no damage done to American lives and American interests, we should be wiser as per American President Trump's conduct so far. He's been very clever, very shrewd, very sharp, no leaks. The execution has been much smoother than the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan, for example. So let's continue in that spirit.
And do you think, it just seems like even starting when you look at it from last year's perspective with Iran to now, it seems like they've been exposed even greater, not only for themselves, but internationally as well. Is there any way that they could still come to the table and try to work something out? Or is it just right now, they're just trying to save face the best that they can?
I think, Mike, the answer is in your question. The key phrase here is save face. Iran is an ancient civilization. Its people have a very strong shame and humiliation culture. They've just been brought to their knees by a nation nearby of only 8 million Jewish people. They are a nation in excess of 19 million people, i.e. the Iranians. And you've had a superpower from across, two oceans has come in and destroyed their most advanced nuclear and uranium enrichment program. This huge humiliation. And the mullahs, despite all of this claptrap about death to America, death to Israel, have not been able to defend their borders. They don't have control over their own skies. I mean, it's a humiliating position to be in. So you just want to respect, you don't kick a man or a woman when they're down, as they say. You want to respect the weaknesses that they have and keep them weak. We don't want to see an Iran that's supported to the point of removing sanctions and therefore re-strengthening, reviving Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, anti-American, anti-Israeli forces in the region. And I think that's what our focus should be on. How do you ensure that the Iranian government in its current form does not regroup and revitalize its assets against American interests and American allies? And I think it's also worth bearing in mind that we don't want to bring our Arab friends and allies, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, in any greater danger. I think lots of people are uncomfortable tonight in that part of the world. We should be able to reassure our allies and our friends that being a comrade of America means that they're safer and not in any way put in any greater danger. And we've done that so far. I think that's the way we ought to continue.
Yeah, all solid points there. And lastly here, before I let you go, what was your take from some of the U.S. media's response and kind of their talking points from what happened over the weekend with the U.S. Striking Iran? I mean, it seemed like in some modes there were trying to take the, was it a big strike? Was it not a strike? Was it successful? There was a kind of a lot of back and forth, and I only bring this up because of what President Trump put on Truth Social earlier today, talking and really laminating the media for some of their negative ways on reporting of what happened on Saturday. So I just want to get your take on that and what you thought about that.
This is a great question, Mike, and it speaks to a much deeper problem here in America, that rather than support the American president at a time of a military operation, at a time of war, elements of the media want to poke fun at the American operation and want to be seen to be minimizing American successes, and want to believe the narrative of the enemy, in this case the Iranian government, and its claims that sufficient damage has not been done. It tells us something about the moral compass of some journalists who would much rather believe America's enemies than believe America's allies and the American president and the American intelligence assessment. And those three indicators, i.e. Americans, intelligence agencies, America's president and America's allies, have confirmed that significant damage was done. The targets were chosen very carefully, and the nuclear facilities are no longer as strong as they were 3 days or a week ago. Now, that is success. And that success should be celebrated, and American military officials should be saluted, and no lives have been lost, and Iranians and the Iranian interests in the region have been weakened. And I think journalists have a moral duty to recognize that we've averted A, nuclear war, and B, American lives have been saved, and C, our allies and friends in the region, Arabs and Israelis, feel safer, and D, our enemies, i.e. the Iranians, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, feel weaker. That should be the narrative, rather than navel gazing and saying, President Trump's operations somehow have not achieved what they sought out to achieve.
Yeah, all great points there, Ed. I want to keep you on, though, right now. We are getting some breaking news. President Trump putting on Truth Social an update here. So I want to read this out to everybody, and you stay on here, and we'll have your remarks at the back end of this. But just being put out right now, President Trump on his Truth Social saying, Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected, and have very effectively countered There have been 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, and 1 was set free because it was headed in a non-threatening direction. I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. Most importantly, they've gotten it all out of their system, and there will hopefully be no further hate. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. Thank you for your attention to this matter there. So that is the big news there coming in. Pretty much what you were saying there
Trump called it weak, guys. He called it weak.
They did get the advance notice, and that they were just, he feels that they were just trying to make a statement to save face.
Yes, I mean, it's exactly, Mike, as you say, we were just discussing this seconds ago. And that is the Iranian approach to President Trump's America, one of respect, one of dignity, and one of fear because of the unpredictability of President Trump. But they just like those tweets when they're ending with "Thank you for your attention to this matter." There's an interesting language there, but I think the key point is
that's a good sign up, I think, Ed.
Yeah, there's something about it that's really endearing. Thank you for your attention to this matter. It's very businesslike. It's very precise. But I think the real line there is the Iranians alerted the Trump White House to this oncoming attack on Al Udeid Air Base. No lives were lost. The Iranians can pump up propaganda inside the country and say, look, we attacked an American air base. It seems as though now they're ready to de-escalate if they've been in touch with the Trump administration. And it seems as though, from what you've just read, President Trump is now saying to the Israelis and to Bibi Netanyahu, it's time to now de-escalate, bring the war down, and the Iranians want to talk. The Iranians want to engage. Be that via Turkey, be that via the Europeans, or be it directly, we will see in the coming days. But as things stand now, Mike, God forbid that there should be any unexpected developments, or the Iranian Supreme Leader dying, or an internal matter in Iran that we can't foresee. It looks, for the moment, we're reaching a place of sanity, and let's be open about this. American victory.
Yeah, very, very true. And I mean, it seems at this moment that everything, the tensions, even when I just read that through, that it seemed like it was lowered to such a way. Now, okay, so it seems like if the U.S. and Iran are somehow on the same page, does that automatically mean that Israel will too? Or will they have their own agenda still and want to maybe pursue?
My fear is that Israel has huge numbers of operatives inside the country. My fear is that there's a rogue operation of some sort against the Supreme Leader. My fear is that there are components inside Iran that think that the government is now so weak, it's time for a revolution of some sort. My fear is that there are elements that inside the IRGC or elsewhere that just feel so humiliated that any surrender from the top guns inside Iran does not cater to their sense of loss in Israel, in Palestine, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. I mean, they've lost on every front. How do you reconcile that loss, that humiliation, that shame in a country, in a culture that develops on the basis of emotion? So I want to believe President Trump, and I want to believe that we now de-escalate, and that should be the normal course of affairs. But we should not discount or disregard the possibility of a rogue operation in the coming days, weeks, and therefore, it's you've got to thank God that someone like President Trump is in the White House that can look at the situation and know his priorities, know his friends from his enemies, and then realize that no amount of attempts to derail where we are now, a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of balance, should force any greater American action.
Well, Ed, it was great to have you on. Thanks so much for your insight and analysis. Also, great to have you on during that breaking news with President Trump's statement and live reaction.
Mike, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mike, thank you.
You have a great one, and we will talk soon. All right, everyone. We'll take another 2-minute break. Stay right here with us. More to come on Live Now from Fox.
All right, y'all. So basically, Iran retaliated against the U.S. by striking a U.S. Army base in Qatari. That's what they called it. That's what I'm going to call it. Don't correct me. All right, so we find out that basically we knew that it was coming. They informed us that they were going to do it. They did it. Trump responded by saying, hey, that was a weak response. Thank you for letting us know it was happening, so no lives were lost. I hope y'all got it out of y'all system. And basically, y'all can get back, everybody can get back to normal life as usual. So it seems like there will not be a retaliation by the USA, but these days, who knows? Last time Trump told us something, he said that he would consider striking Iran for 2 weeks. Turned around, it was 2 days. So whether or not, we will retaliate is yet to be seen. But as they continue to keep me updated on what's going on, I'll keep y'all updated. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. We most definitely got every piece of news that it was to get regarding this situation, man. But yeah, Iran retaliated. Shout out to everybody in the comments. Shout out to all my members, the new members as well as the old ones. Shout out to all the new subscribers as well as the old ones. Shout out to anybody that sent a gift or a super chat or a super sticker. Know that you are most definitely appreciated. And at the end of the day, always remember that this channel or its broadcaster is nothing without y'all. I appreciate each and every one of y'all. Man, if anything else pops off, I'll most definitely be pressing that live button. So make sure if you subscribe to the channel, you turn your notification bell on to all so that you don't miss nothing coming from over here, man. Shout out to y'all. May y'all have a great day. Everybody be blessed. And with that being said, it's time for me to make my grand exit. Y'all already know how this go. Sidewalk gang, checking out. I'll catch y'all on the next one, man. Y'all be good. I'm gone.